Okay, we're live now, Judge Rosie.
Great.
Um,
Welcome, everyone, um, to the inaugural meeting of our committee, the Program Development and Impact Committee, PDI Committee. We can go ahead and get started. I'm not sure who's giving the housekeeping remarks.
That'll be me.
Okay, great. Janet.
Welcome committee members, liaisons, and members of the public to the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Program Development and Impact Committee meeting. Thank you for joining us. We are using Zoom with the goal to foster a more inclusive environment and effective meeting. If you would like to comment during the meeting, please use the raised hand feature. Please utilize this tool to virtually indicate that you would like to speak in order to help the chair facilitate the discussion. A friendly reminder that this is a video conference. Per Bagley-Keene requirements, all cameras must be kept on for the duration of the meeting. If you are unable to have your camera on, you must indicate a reason for your non-appearance during the meeting. Please be aware of your surroundings behind you. All committee meetings will be recorded and posted to the State Bar website. Zoom captioning is available. To enable, select Live Transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then select Enable Auto Transcription. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. Can we go ahead and take roll call?
yes. Commissioner Alakani.
Here.
Commissioner Babcock.
Here.
Commissioner Campbell. Let us know if she would be unable to make it. Commissioner Escobedo is unable to come. Commissioner Morales, not here. Commissioner Smith.
Present.
And Chair Rosie.
I am here.
We do have a quorum, and I will go ahead and do roll for the liaisons and advisors as well.
Thank you.
Judge Yang is unavailable today. Selena Copeland from LAC. Hi, Lauren. You're here for Selena, I bet.
Selena
Great.
will be joining as well.
Oh, great. Thank you both for coming. Melanie Snyder from the Judicial Council. Hi, Selena. Thank you for joining. State Bar staff is Chris McConkey is here. Dwan Nguyen. Listening in, I believe. Crystal Bundang will be joining a little bit later to present. Kim Turner is here. Shannon is here. Shannon Crossley is here. And that concludes the roll call, Judge Rosie.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so we're going to go to public comment. I'll note for the minutes and for the record that we received one pre-submitted public comment that was circulated to all committee members prior to today's meeting. Are there any other members of the public who wish to give a comment about any item on our agenda at this time?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. All right, then we will move along on our agenda. So we have not a long agenda, but many things to talk about today. We may need to take some items out of order in our agenda today, just because we have some speakers from Legal Services in Northern California and Neighborhood Legal Services of LA joining us around 12:40 or so today to present briefly on disaster legal services. So we will move things around if we need to in order to make sure that we can take them at the time that they're able to be here. If we're still discussing our charter when they join, we'll go ahead and pause that discussion and then take it up perhaps after other speakers. But let's go ahead and take the first item on our agenda, which is the proposed charter for our new PDI committee. As I indicated at the beginning, this is our inaugural meeting. This committee didn't really exist in this form before. And so one of the things what we need to do is to come up with a charter for our committee, which we will then bring to the full Trust Fund Commission for approval, hopefully later this month. But I believe that staff has gone to great lengths and much work to work on a proposed charter for us based on the meetings that we had back in November about setting up this committee. And I'm not sure
Yeah.
which, Chris, is that you that's going to
It'll be
present?
me. I get
Thank-
to present the draft charter. Thank you, Judge Rossi. So yeah, so we posted, so what staff has done is it has taken the materials that were posted for the commission's November 8th, 2024 meeting, where staff presented recommendations from a working group of the commission as to how to restructure the commission's committees. So we kind of took the language that was from the working group's memo or recommendations to draft charters for each committee. So each committee got a draft charter to see at its inaugural meeting. So we posted this before this meeting. The purpose and role at the top, the information under organization, which is membership information and meetings, is very similar to my knowledge across all the charters and very much just comes from the working group's recommendation. Some of the information that was on the slides from the November 8th meeting, staff didn't really tinker with that. It's kind of like what you would have seen in the fall. The part that staff did a little bit of work on to bring to you in the way of a recommendation, but still, I would say, largely tries to capture the spirit of the working group's proposal, is under authority and responsibilities. So I know at least one commissioner wrote to me in advance with a question about the membership information paragraph. The whole charter is open for discussion, but I would begin by walking you through the authorities and responsibilities to sort of explain what the working group's thinking was in the fall, my recollection of the commission meeting in November, and what staff's thinking is as far as how we sort of phrased things here. I am sharing my screen as a live Word doc, so I have track changes turned on so I can actually wordsmith this live if there's something the committee needs to edit before we present it for the committee, votes on it to present it to the commission on February 28th. Okay. If it's okay, Judge Rossi, I'm just going to skip to authority and responsibilities. I mean, I assume everyone had a chance to kind of skim the top because it was with the posted materials, but essentially the top lays, I'll just read the purpose and role because that's kind of helpful for thinking about the authorities and responsibilities. The purpose and role of the Program Development and Impact Committee is to advance the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission's support for legal aid through new initiatives, innovations, and stakeholder engagement while ensuring effective evaluation and communication of program impacts. And I believe that's mostly taken from the materials in the fall. That was the infrastructure working group's thinking. So I have not edited that. Okay.
That looks good to me.
Thank you, Erin. And actually, Erin, did you want to, before I get to those responsibilities, I guess it makes sense to kind of go in order. Did you want to raise your question sort of about the organization subsection? And
Yeah, if you wanted to do that now, Chris, thanks. And apologies in advance. I'm getting over a cold, so I've got, frog in my throat. Yeah, just a couple questions on the membership information paragraph, which may apply across the other committee charters if they're similar. I was wondering if we needed to state how committee members are selected to be on this committee. We state how the chair will be selected by the members, but not how the members will be selected. So I was wondering if that's something we might want to consider including. And then the other item was the specifying that the committee must have between 6 and 8 members. And I understand that's from the resolution that we passed back in November, where we approved that chart the new committee lineup, which did include kind of a number of people in each committee. So I understand that's from something we already passed. So it's just maybe a broader point again for all committees. If the commission ever were to decide one committee actually needed more members or fewer members as, the workloads become apparent through this new structure, we might want to leave ourselves some flexibility, or if we had, unexpected vacancies and we might fall below 6. I just would hate to sort of violate a charter and require a bunch of administrative hurdles for kind of unexpected things. So if we could leave ourselves a little wiggle room there, maybe, 6 to 8, unless something comes up or something like that. So just those two kind of administrative points.
I thought that was very pragmatic, and what I would propose is to, because I think this language might be similar in the other committees as draft charters, like the grant eligibility. I think we should bring it up. The Grant Eligibility Support Committee adopted their draft charter already, and I think it had similar language. But I think all the committees are going to be presenting their draft charters to the executive committee next Friday before they all go to the full commission on the 28th. I can raise that because it's like a cross charter suggestion. I can raise those two things, as including language about maybe how the other committee members are selected, and if there needs to be a caveat for the membership range to allow for, like a vacancies or something like that, or if the committee needs to be bigger for some reason, how the commission can set that. Is that
That sounds great.
that sound good? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'll be at the executive committee. Judge Rossi will be there, and I think we can flag that. Okay. So I'm making a note. Thank you for
flagging
suggesting
that, Aaron. That's those are great points.
Okay. So the authorities and the responsibilities, this is where each committee's charter is very, very different. This is where each committee will get its kind of marching orders, so to speak, from the commission after the commission adopts the charter and it becomes official. So this language is a little bit different in that it's from what was on the slides in November, and just that we kind of fleshed it out a little bit more, because on the slides they were just bullet points, and they and also it was kind of sourced from the working group's memo in the fall, but we tried to give it a little bit more of the to complete it for the how kind of a charter should sound. I'm just going to go through each bullet point, and I think that the first two bullet points are the ones where there would be a change in how the commission handles something from how it's done it historically. It's kind of like that's where, just a flag, when this goes to the executive committee, if it goes like this, if it goes to the full commission, other commissioners who've been on the commission for a while will know, like, oh, that's going to be different, but that is hopefully in the spirit of delegating more to the committee so the full commission can focus a little bit more on policy at its meetings. Okay. So the first bullet point reads, approve requests for proposals, RFPs, and recommend awards for new types of funding. I'm just going to pause for a second and say what that is capturing from the working group's recommendation in the discussion last fall is that would be like a brand new type of grant that the legislature might create that would not be a reoccurring grant, like say partnership grants that kind of comes up every year, or if there's another iteration of a homelessness prevention grant or something. But new types of funding, approve the RFP and recommend awards. RFPs generally identify, this is not a change from practice, this is kind of the current reality. Generally identify grant timelines, eligibility criteria, scoring rubrics, reporting requirements, and similar parameters. Most of those are actual headings in the RFPs. The committee may approve awards for new funding as opposed to merely recommend them if the commission delegates that authority, for example, to address an urgent need. The thing that's a little different here from the way the commission has handled RFPs in the past is historically, RFPs always go all the way up to the full commission for approval. Maybe a committee would design it, but it would go up to the full commission for approval. Unless it was a unless the commission delegated authority to a committee to approve it because it knew that the funds needed to go out as quickly as possible or something. So this be a standing change where this committee would be able to approve the RFP. The full commission would still approve the awards, but it would delegate to this committee authority on a standing basis to approve RFPs for new funds. And that is to capture one of the major changes the infrastructure working group recommended, which is that the full commission take a step back from designing and approving RFPs. And I think also they recommended taking a step back from being so involved with scoring. I didn't staff the working group, but it's my recollection from the fall that the thinking there was a lot of the commission's RFPs are similar to one another. The commission always takes the most similar RFP for a new funding source and kind of adapts it to the authorizing statute, and maybe we'll like tinker a little bit with something and like the rubric or something or a scoring preference, but there's a lot of through lines and similarities. And so it would be appropriate, I believe the thinking was, for a committee to have that delegated authority. The commission could trust a committee to carry out that work because the RFPs are not significantly different between competitive opportunities. There's a lot of similarity between those RFPs. So this is what was approved in concept by the commission in November by adopting, I don't know if you all recall, but there were, I think, 3 options. There was like an option A, an option B, and an option C. And this was part of option A. The next bullet point is the other one that would be a change from how the commission has done things historically, and it's also part of option A, which is approve significant changes to RFPs for reoccurring types of funding. So the first bullet point is just new types of funding. The second bullet point would be things like partnership grants that we've had for a long time, and they just get refreshed every year. To approve only significant changes, not have to approve the whole RFP. And going forward, technical updates to RFPs that are solely to allow for the next cycle of a reoccurring grant. So that would be things like reflecting the new amount of funds that is available for the next cycle, updating RFPs for the dates. The grant timeline will have the new year in it and the like. But those sorts of things would not be necessary, and other changes that are purely necessary to comply with a governing statute, regulation, or commission resolution wouldn't need committee or commission approval, but that staff could just make that change, but that because that wouldn't be, quote, significant, but that anything that would be a significant change would have to go to this committee. So if it's sort of a conforming update or like a technical update, staff would have the authority to sort of just re-release the RFP. This would be a change because historically the commission's always approved RFPs. But again, the infrastructure working group recommended that it take a step back from that. It didn't think it was, and staff would agree with this, it's necessary on an annual basis that the full commission have to approve even like tiny little technical changes, or if, and so what we're kind of thinking about, for example, with a conforming change for a commission resolution is if the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission changes the reporting framework for all grants, for example, staff could just go into the RFP and swap out the reporting requirements language to match what the commission has adopted as the new reporting requirements for all grants, and wouldn't need to then have the committee also reapprove the RFP going forward, kind of thing. Changes to comply with the statute regulation. Usually the RFPs just quote them like verbatim, so we would just swap the language out, copy and paste. Okay. I will flag that when this is staff's recommendation, this is from the working group's thinking in the fall. I will flag this bullet point in particular some commissioners on the 20th might want to know a little bit more about like what this committee's thinking is about like what might be a significant change. So Judge Rossi, you had said like you thought it might be helpful in this meeting to brainstorm what would be significant versus not significant. And I think that might be helpful for the executive committee next week to be able to talk about that, and maybe at the full commission meeting. But essentially what we tried to do here was just say, if it's just sort of updating it for a clear change in the law or commission policy where we can just swap out the language, we wouldn't need to bring that. or if we're just like updating the years on the RFP or the funding amount, like technical, so that that's updated and correct, that wouldn't come to this committee. But other things about changes, what staff was contemplating, changes to scoring rubrics, how points are spread, funding preferences that the commission had adopted historically. If a funding formula were to change, these things would probably be substantive and significant and would have to go to this committee. It can kind of come up with almost an endless list of examples, but those sorts of things would probably arise to the level of significant.
Yeah, I mean, we could come up with an endless list. And I don't want us to do that. I think it probably makes sense, though, and I guess we're also not necessarily wedded to the word significant. It could be substantial or some other word. But I think that the point of this one, as I understand it, is just to allow state bar staff to make these technical changes that come up from time to time, especially changing the, funding cycle years and from, 25, 26, 26, 27. That's not something that I necessarily think the committee needs to be involved in. But I am interested in hearing from my fellow commissioners or other staff about well, let's start with bullet point number 2 since we're there. Do we want to specify in this section some things that we think are significant, or be more specific? And I see, Ken, you have your hand up. So thank you for taking me up on that.
Yeah, sure. So excuse me. I would think that we would want to leave it with language, whether the word is significant or substantial doesn't matter that much to me, but I don't know that we would want to come in within this document a list of the proposed things that we might think we want to look at as significant changes. I think it would be helpful at some point, whether it's in this meeting or in a future meeting, for us to brainstorm a bit about what are some significant changes. I don't know everyone's background, but I know that Erin and I both in our prior lives were grantees. And so we bring a perspective that perhaps not everyone has, because not everyone has been on sort of the other side of the equation. And I certainly, from my experience as a grantee, would have a number of different things that I think would probably be classified as significant changes. But I don't know if they need to be listed in the charter. I think it's something that we just would want to brainstorm on our own.
I'll just say as a matter of process that this committee currently plans to meet monthly, which we do actually hope to like release some of those meetings for you, but we could agendize for a future meeting if this charter is the one the committee recommends and the commission approves. We could agendize for the very next meeting, like to talk about what those are and capture them in the meeting minutes, and that would kind of serve as staff's like I keep saying marching orders, but I don't know, staff's instructions for like what guidelines for like, what the committee, how the committee interprets that language.
And I will say also that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, and also staff would always, I think, consult the committee chair if it had questions, like if something wasn't contemplated in advance, so it wasn't on the list, but it comes up. I think we would at a minimum reach out to the committee chair and get like Judge Rossi's or whoever's performing that role's input on, does this need to be on the agenda for the next committee meeting, or does this not feel significant? And the chair can also confer with the commission co-chairs if appropriate, right, about that sort of thing. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, though, Ken, about maybe not locking us in this document in the charter itself to what is or isn't. That way we do have the flexibility as a committee, because maybe we decide something is significant and then later we decide it's not. And we want to be able to have, I think, that flexibility. And also to your point about you know, the makeup of this committee and having you know, you and Aaron here who, you know, were grantees. I think that's, you know, that will be significant, to use the word in our charter, in how we determine what is significant. So I'm glad that you both are here and have that perspective that we can, you know, bring it forward. Jacqueline, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I agree with everything that everyone has already said. I don't think the charter document is the right place to list the changes, and this way we list examples or try to list all of the potential changes. I don't think the charter document is a good place for that, and this way we also maintain that flexibility that everyone has mentioned, and because there may be issues and circumstances which which are brand new, and because this is dealing with new initiatives. So I agree with all of your assessments.
Great. Great. So it sounds like and Aaron, any thoughts on this contrary to what everyone has said? Right.
Nope, sounds
So I
good.
think, okay. So, Chris, we have to take a vote on this at some point, but right? But do we want to do we do them separately for each bullet for the bullet points, or do we do
We
it as
can-
a one global thing for the whole charter?
We can do the whole one vote for the whole charter.
Okay.
I did want to point out one other suggestion that was made that
Okay.
came in after we posted the draft. It's in track changes here, so I'm gonna scroll down. I will just read the others just real quick so that you know.
Yeah, and we may want to, and we probably want to go back to one just to get everybody's thoughts on the first bullet point. But yeah, let's go and look at your track changes first.
So the rest I think the rest I think likely wouldn't raise any questions or anything. It's hard to predict, but I don't think the rest of the bullet points would raise necessarily questions for the commission because they are not necessarily major changes from the way the commission has done something in the past, with the exception maybe of having a single committee explore changes to the reporting framework. But these were all things that I think the commission got really excited about in the fall. So the other ones are help score proposals for new types of funding. I just want to I had almost forgotten this. I just wanted to remind everyone, when the infrastructure working group uh, made it described its three options in November, option A, B, and C. The one that was adopted was option A, and it actually had this committee scoring all, I think it was originally scores all applications for new types of funding, and that was actually changed in the resolution to be at least two commissioners. It wouldn't have to be this committee, but at least two commissioners will support staff in scoring applications for new types of fundings. It was kind of like lifted out of the proposal for just this committee, and just like any commissioner could help, and it would be like two commissioners that would do that. So
And
we
Chris,
left it in, but
can I ask you just quickly for clarification? It's not necessarily commissioners on this committee, but
that,
the
yeah,
whole.
because originally the proposal, it was going to be this committee that would always score. So you'd have to essentially be sitting on this committee to score. And that got changed to be just two commissioners will support staff in scoring. So it's still in this committee charter's help score, but it doesn't lock the committee into being, it wouldn't have to be this committee. That would be one, that would appoint the two commissioners every time to score. I do think, though, because it would be this committee that would design the RFP for the new type of funding, it would be very germane for this committee to try to furnish a commissioner or two to help score, because it would have been, that it would be those commissioners who could say, like, here's why we wrote the RFP this way. So I thought it was good to leave it in. Yeah, Jacqueline.
So, so you mentioned two scorers. Is it limited to two or just a minimum of two?
I'll have to double check. I think the resolution that the commission adopted on November 8th specifies two commissioners will score
Okay, because
for new types of funding.
okay, because when you say that any commissioner can be involved in the scoring, But that was making me think like, okay, so even if you have a minimum of two, then anyone else who wanted to be involved could also be involved. But you're saying you need to check to verify if it's limited to two.
I think it would be limited because more than two could trigger a Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act requirement, and it could become a committee meeting. And then the scoring would be taking place in a public meeting, which the commission historically has tried to avoid to
Okay.
protect the privacy of like if an applicant might get a low score, for example, that the conversation is not like recorded and publicly
Okay.
available. Yeah. Explore ways to refine the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission's reporting framework. I'm scroll down a bit to reduce burdens on grantees. And this language was proposed after the charter was the draft charter was posted. Support transparency and mutual accountability and promote impactful communications with stakeholders. I believe this language was proposed because it was when they just said reduce burdens on grantees and promote impactful conversations, it kind of missed what was a core function of reporting on public funds, which is to allow the commission. We didn't want to say like allow the commission to perform oversight, but that's essentially like the piece that was missing, was that the commission could make sure the dollars were being used appropriately if the authorizing statute requires they be used in a particular way. We tried to draft it though to kind of capture that without sounding like the commission's like hovering over all the grantees' shoulders, but to still make sure that was incorporated, and also acknowledge that it's actually kind of mutual accountability. The commission is accountable to the grantees to do a good job in designing reporting requirements that are reasonable and effective for them and promote their ability to continue to receive funds from the state and the federal government in the future, and that the state wants to give more funding to legal aid and the reporting framework is set up to allow for that, and that the commission can do a good job making sure that each grantee knows what they can use the dollars on and gets technical assistance on the basis of like what they report. So if they're reporting something that's needs to be different, the commission and staff can support the grantee in doing that. So if that language kind of sounds okay, I would accept this track change before you voted. Okay.
That does sound okay, Chris. And can I make another suggestion on this point before you move on?
Yes.
I was wondering if this point might be a place to add a reference to the evaluation piece of our committee's broader purpose. I thought it might be nice to really more explicitly reference the evaluation in our, what is this called? Actions.
Authorities and responsibilities. I'm going to scroll back up so you see the whole set. There you go.
Yeah, authorities and responsibilities. So I thought about like maybe right next to where that other track change was, and maybe would you mind blowing up your screen a little bit? It's quite tiny for me, but perfect. Thank you. Maybe add like something like reflect meaningful program evaluation or something like that to tie together, in other words, our work on, evaluating the work and the role of reporting in getting us that information that we've determined is a meaningful evaluation of the programs.
Would you add that as a final clause?
Yeah, support transparency. Yeah, wherever. I don't think it matters where it goes in the list, but reflect meaningful program evaluation was my first brainstorm. But yeah, interested in what other people think too.
Yeah, I like that. I think that reflects and gives more detail to what some of our authorities and responsibilities?
Authority and responsibility. I know, I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
Authority and responsibilities. Yeah.
It sounds very impressive.
Yeah, I like it as well. I do know that, I mean, there are a lot of different evaluation pieces that grantees are required to provide to the commission. And I think that from a grantee's perspective, they sometimes kind of wonder, like, why am I providing this information? And how will this help move the needle, if at all, in terms of what the commission's trying to do. And so looking at, I mean, one way to reduce burden is to make sure that the questions we're asking and the burden we're putting on people is for meaningful information.
Good. And then I'm just gonna, I don't want the committee to feel rushed in this conversation, but we do have 2 guest speakers who'll be joining at 12:40.
Yep.
I'm not going to try and squeeze in a vote like before
Well,
they, but if you're okay with like they pop in, they'll be here for 20 minutes and then we can resume. Okay, I just want to make sure that's okay.
well, we have 5, right?
We do. We have a nice lineup of guest speakers for like potential committee commission priorities. But I want to make sure that our 2 that are joining at 12:40 get to go right away because they
Sure.
have to hop off
Sure.
at 1. The others
Okay.
are State Bar staff, so they've expressed some flexibility to, you know.
Okay. Chris, can you scroll up? I made it bigger on my screen because I was like Aaron and I was leaning in. I couldn't see what the words were. But just to go back to bullet point 1, because I know we pulled this, or you all pulled this from our November meeting and from the proposal A that the full commission voted on. But I just wanted to make sure that that we checked in with other commissioners to see if folks had thoughts about this. To me, it seems like what I heard, and again, I am a newer commissioner, so I wasn't here back in the days when the full commission was doing these things, but this is what I understood the innovation working group to want this committee to do, but I want to just get a sense from other commissioners if the language in bullet number 1 is all right with everyone. We don't have to take a vote now, but I do want to make sure that folks have a chance to talk about it if they have thoughts.
Well, I think it makes sense. I think the language makes sense, and I think it follows along the line of thinking, which was before my time on the commission, of not developing a new committee for every single new funding source that comes along, but rather to lump all that activity into one committee. And I think that first bullet point kind of reflects that.
I think that was the infrastructure working group's thinking too.
Yeah.
Is that every time there's a new funding source.
Okay. Jacqueline, any concerns with this language?
It looks appropriate to me. Looks fine.
Okay. Well, Chris, do you want to take, I mean, if we have time, we can take the vote now. That'll knock one thing off our agenda.
Yeah, I need to I will need to pull up the slide to do that. And there's a chance so we'll see if we can do it, if I can do it quickly enough, but there's a chance our guest
If not, we
speakers
can
will
come
pop
back
in.
to it.
Yeah, but then we'll do the vote right after they leave.
Okay.
I have one more question on the charter before we took a vote too.
I'm so
and I don't
sorry,
want it to
Aaron.
be rushed either.
I don't
That's
want
the other thing.
Yeah. We don't need to rush.
Yeah. Aaron, do you want to ask your question now, since I don't know if our guest speakers have joined yet?
Sure. My question kind of goes to our next agenda item as well, which is around the delegation of authority on the remaining funds in the HP4 grant. So and maybe it's just a point of clarification, but I wanted to make sure that that action is contemplated in the language here, and maybe you can explain a bit about staff's thinking there, Chris, like which authority that falls under, and kind of how that kind of action fits across our new lineup of committees.
Yeah, really good question. So the agenda item to which Aaron's referring is the staff's recommendation that this committee seek a delegation of authority on February 28th to reallocate some unspent HP4 dollars among the existing HP4 grantees. After we agendized that item for this committee meeting and prepared the materials, we actually realized it might not be this committee. It likely wouldn't actually be this committee moving forward that would handle reallocations. We actually think what the infrastructure working group would have recommended is that staff handle reallocations, and if there's any committee they consult with, it's probably a different committee. It would be like XCOM or the grant eligibility and support, but probably not the PDI committee. I believe the recommendation is going to be for February 28th that staff have authority to handle reallocations. We wanted to keep it on the agenda for this meeting because we weren't sure what the executive committee and full commission was going to say and what its preference would be. It's hard to predict. And we wanted to make sure a committee brought it to the commission meeting. So we were hoping this committee would feel comfortable asking for that delegation authority. It might be the only time it ever asks for it if the commission says, you know what, actually the authority should lie elsewhere moving forward. But this committee could be its home for like this one reallocation, so we don't lose time on it. But actually, and we as soon as shortly after we put it on the agenda, we realized that looking when we were drafting the committee charter, it actually probably wouldn't be this committee that would do that. Yeah.
Thank
This
you.
committee's focused more on new funds and
Yeah.
emergent policies.
Yeah, no, that very closely kind of mirrors my thought process on this as well. So I think we're on the same page there.
So maybe it'll be a one-time thing, I think.
Got
Yeah,
it.
okay, great. All right. I want to see if we have Skip Koenig and Jenny Anders Gable with us. Just because I can't, I'm showing my screen. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, this is Skip. I'm here.
Wonderful.
We're both here.
Yay! Thank you so much.
Yay.
Judge Rossi, would you like to introduce them? You want me to introduce them?
Sure. Well, let me just, I'll let you introduce them, but let me just, sort of introduce, the what we're going to do in this portion of the meeting. And because this is, I think, new for the Trust Fund Commission. And, and one of the great things about being on this committee is that we really are charged with looking at new and innovative ideas in this arena, and that's not something that the commission has really done before. And so State Bar staff lined up a great set of presentations for us, and I think they're really ideas and projects that we can look at, and maybe we take, maybe we adopt 2 or 3 of these as projects for the committee for this year or in the years moving forward. But I think it's a great way for us to sort of kick off this idea of being in an innovative space. So thank you to State Bar staff and for folks coming in from Northern California and Neighborhood Legal Services in LA. So you want to, I don't know who's going first or if they're going together. So
They're kind of going together, and I'll do my little like their titles and everything. So yeah, so this we want to be respectful of Skip and Jenny's time, and they need to leave at 1. So this is actually part of the 2025 and beyond priorities for the commission that this committee would be the one to implement. And we wanted to make sure disaster legal services was one of the things the committee and the commission got to contemplate prioritizing. So I'm really, really thankful to Skip Koenig, who's the director of pro bono at Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County, which is of course a nonprofit the commission funds, and also Jenny Anders Gable, who's regional counsel at Legal Services of Northern California, which is also a nonprofit this commission funds. They're both very big providers in NorCal and LA County, and they're here to talk about how the commission, or to lay the foundation for the commission and this committee's thinking about its role in responding to natural disasters. And I'm just going to turn, and they're going to share the time, and we're going to save. They're going to give like about 10-ish minutes of remarks, 5-10 minutes remarks, and then we're going to save 5-10 minutes for questions. And I think they have to leave more or less right at 1. So.
Jenny, you want to start?
Thanks. Sure. Yeah, I'll start. Thanks, Skip, and thanks, Chris, and everyone for having us. As Chris said, I am Jenny Anders Gable. I help to oversee and direct and lead Legal Services of Northern California's work related to disaster law. It's something that we have been doing for a long time, really responding to some of the major disasters that have affected our 23 very rural Northern California counties that keep seeing the impacts of these disasters. So for better and or for worse, this is something that we're committed to. We can't escape from this, and we've really folded it into our practice as a legal aid law firm, using existing funding sources to at least keep a couple of us always plugged into these issues, because the legal issues go on for many years. And so that being said, that's very unique to Legal Services of Northern California. A lot of our partners throughout the state are mostly fully involved in this work when there's a disaster in their area. And so in that spirit, part of what I also do is chair the statewide Disaster Legal Assistance Collaborative, where I get to coordinate with a lot of these partners throughout the state, a lot of legal aid, legal services providers, a lot of private attorneys, law firms who engage in the delivery of pro bono services after disasters. The State Bar has a role. There's other disaster partners who participate in this. And the role that this organization, or I should say an informal collaborative, plays is to have this space where we're all able to come together on a very regular basis, regardless of if there is a disaster happening at the exact moment, or if we're just brainstorming or responding to disasters from prior years, or thinking prospectively, where we all know each other exist. We all know what resources exist. We all know that if something were to happen, in our service area in that week or in that month, who the players are, how to get plugged into, the best systems. And sometimes that means, knowing who to reach out to when your current structure doesn't have the infrastructure to support what is necessary at that moment. And so Skip will talk a little bit about what they're seeing in LA, or what legal aids have to address when a fire or earthquake or a flood or whatever the disaster is impacts their communities, particularly when it's a larger scale disaster where the local legal aid staff are impacted. And then what does it look like, and how can other people support that work? And so in the spirit of current events, that's something that I have been doing a lot of, both in my role with the Disaster Legal Assistance Collaborative with DLAC, but also by the generosity of my executive director, who is happy to share my time and support with others, whether that's substantive legal understanding, helping with actual FEMA questions, or just the logistical capacity building that's necessary, especially in the aftermath of a larger disaster, where there's so many people who need legal services, and there's so many pro bono people who want to help, and there's so many partners and opportunities to plug things in. It can be a lot for any one entity, and the key to a lot of legal aid work always, but especially again with respect to disasters, is really that coordination and collaboration piece. And so I know we're keeping this short, so I'm going to kick it over to you, Skip.
Thank you, Jenny. So real quickly, so you're kind of wondering, why is the pro bono director here talking about disaster assistance? And that's because I wear several hats in my organization, and one of is to supervise our disaster assistance program, which I've been doing since 2018 rather, in response to the Woolsey fire. And Neighborhood Legal Services has been engaged in disaster assistance work dating back to the Northridge earthquake in the 1980s. The one thing I really want to emphasize is, Jenny said that, your current structure doesn't necessarily have the capacity to respond to an immediate disaster. And that's what we're experiencing right now in LA. And that's why Jenny, we're using, Jenny's services. She's been incredible and invaluable partner, helping us with our FEMA clinics and a number of other ways that we're responding. Really what this addresses is the fact that we had for a couple of years some funding through LSC and through Cal OES to put together a disaster assistance program. Unfortunately, that funding ran out. And because, good news, we didn't have any major disasters in Southern California over the last 3 years. But the bad news is LSC only funds disasters, and they fund it a year or two after the disasters. So we weren't able to get any more funding. Because it is a priority for our organization, I was able to continue to stay active in DLAC, but I didn't have a team. So when this fire hit, I had to reassemble a team, but it's mostly all of our existing staff who have more than a full caseload. So the burden has been really extensive. So what we really need is funding to keep a team in place that's nimble enough to respond to disasters as they occur. But once the work on the immediate disaster has passed, to be able to shift to preparation and resilience for communities. Some of the work that we were doing 2.5 years ago was not necessarily in response to a disaster, but it was in response to the climate crisis that we're all experiencing and the disasters the impacts of that in low-income communities with excessive heat events and power safety shutoffs and wildfire smoke, just a variety. But we need that kind of nimbleness to be able to respond to whatever it is that is befalling our communities. And I know we wanted to try to leave like 10 minutes or so for questions. I can go on, but I'm going to just stop there and open it up for questions.
Thanks, Skip and Jenny. Appreciate you taking the time to be here during an actual, post-disaster scenario in Southern California. Are there commissioners that have questions? Can I see your?
Yeah, Skip, who is it? Is it your organization or is it some other organization that is coordinating the various different, whether they're legal clinics or different events that are going on by which, whether it's staff lawyers or pro bono lawyers are getting involved in providing assistance in LA County?
That's a great question. So we are kind of coordinating. We're like the central organization, but we're working very, very closely with all of our sister organizations. So, for example, we are staffing the Disaster Recovery Center that's was originally in Pasadena, then moved to Altadena. LAFLA, because of their geography and because of their willingness, they have been staffing the DRC on the west side. But we're kind of running point so that people don't step on each other's toes. And what we did very, very quickly, we were able to put together a training on what you need to know if you're going to volunteer at a disaster recovery center. And the second hour of that training was for FEMA appeals. As part of that training, we had a sign-up sheet for volunteers. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that we had 1,400 people sign up for that training. We've had close to 600 people sign up as volunteers for the work that we're all doing. That list of volunteers, thanks to the efforts of Jenny Anders Gable's partner, so to speak, Jenny Gomez, that's all been broken down and categorized by their areas of expertise. That list is shared out with all the organizations because everybody needs help. So, and then we've also been coordinating who's doing FEMA clinics, who's doing landlord-tenant clinics, who's doing insurance clinics. And we're in the process of putting together a shared calendar that DLAC is going to help us with, that all the organizations can put their clinics and outreach events and trainings so that, and then that's going to be available to the public so they know where they can go. And we're trying not to duplicate and overlap. So we're the coordination in response to a disaster this size is the key. But again, we're straining our staff to do that because we didn't have anybody dedicated for this type of work. And that's why we had to call on Lisnick to help us with this effort. And we're also, we've got help from CLA SoCal helping us with our intake calls. So it's a lot of coordination and it's a lot of collaboration.
Right. Even with those 600 volunteers, I mean, they don't coordinate themselves. I mean, you're spending significant staff time, no doubt, as are other organizations, in coordinating those volunteers, even if you get all 600 of them to actually volunteer, and then the staff time that people are providing in doing direct service, it's got to be significant.
That's exactly right. And, we've, again, big shout out to Lisnick because Jenny Gomez has helped us pull through that volunteer list. So we know who do we call for a FEMA question, who do we call for a title question. And then we've also been fortunate. We've had a couple of retired legal service folks that have come back to us and said, hey, we we've got time, put us to work. And so that's been helpful too, but that takes, you know, still staff time to work with them.
Other
Thanks, Jim.
questions for, if we have them for 5 more minutes?
Yeah, I was trying to raise my hand and couldn't find it. So I just unmuted. Thank you both, Skip and Jenny, for so much for what you're doing. And for taking the time out of what I'm sure are extremely busy schedules to come and talk to us about this. I've got a few questions. This kind of overlaps with our later agenda item of, you know, how is this committee going to help the field rapidly respond to the changing policy landscape? So if I heard you correctly, it sounds like, kind of cutting to the chase, you know, what would be really helpful kind of dollars wise are 2 things. One is continuous funding, like you were saying, Jenny, to keep people in this area, even in between disasters. So, and then like you were saying, Skip, to kind of lay the groundwork for prevention and resilience. So like ongoing funding, even when there's not a disaster, right? And kind of immediate, flexible, rapid response kind of funding to respond in the moment. So before I ask my other questions, is that kind of what it boils down to?
Yeah, it boils down to that. What we've also talked about internally lately, especially as I've been using a lot of my time to support a county that's not one of, you know, our counties that we're funded to serve, is if there could be, you know, maybe even flexibility in existing IOLTA or EAF funds that would possibly allow for that kind of exception or flexibility, not a requirement, but, you know, flexibility or exception in the times of these disasters to, if, you know, you have the staff in one county that has the experience and the ability to help, especially in situations where the local, I mean, if the reverse were true, you know, in LA, there's a lot of legal aids on the ground, but if this were happening in a smaller rural county, that county staff is impacted, they're evacuated themselves, there's not other legal aids around, like if then, you know, there could be other legal aids throughout the state who would be able to like kind of fill in if needed on some sort of temporary basis. But yeah, you got it right. So you can move if you want to go to your other questions.
Yeah, no, and thank you for pointing that out. That kind of goes to a point I'm going to make later in the meeting too, about trying to think flexibly about this county by county kind of service model that we're used to using and how it may not fit, you know, the modern technological age. We're also going to be talking about technology in this meeting, you know. So that, okay, that's great. So a couple other quick questions. I know we're short on time. Skip, you mentioned Cal OES, Office of Emergency Services, and you said the money ran out. So, I mean, can you maybe say just briefly a little more about the relationship between Cal OES in, you know, immediate disaster aftermath and its funding of legal services? It's just like not reliable, not there. Like, what's the deal?
Well, I'm not going to, I don't want to say it's not reliable or whatever, but you know, it's challenging to get the funding. And typically, because California is such a big state, and unfortunately we have disasters up and down the state, and their money is limited. And so they're going to focus on where is a disaster. And so they fund those counties and those organizations that are in those counties, which is, I'm not saying that's inappropriate, but getting back to the point about we need to have systems in place so that we can respond. It's hard to build the plane while you're flying it, kind of thing. So that's why we need additional funding. And so it's not necessarily a criticism of their service model because it's limited funds, but you know, we just need to recognize that it's we've got an ongoing disaster in this country, which is climate change, and so. You know, every year our communities are being impacted by it. So if we're not responding to fires, we're responding to people dying in their units from excessive heat.
And that Cal OES grant that Skip got, that NLS received, that's not an ordinary thing. That Cal OES does not ordinarily fund disaster legal services. That was part of a larger grant, and there was some, you know, very thoughtful response to that request for proposals to get legal services funding. But that is not like an ordinary source of legal services support by any means. It was a special project.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And then, you know, for my last question, what if FEMA doesn't exist in a month? I mean, you know, like just for this committee to be thinking like, do we need to be backfilling FEMA dollars? I mean, it's a giant mess, obviously, but I just don't want us to pretend like those federal dollars are not relevant.
Well, and not only that, but our state sees so many large disasters, so many large fires. Last summer, we had the Park Fire in Northern California, displaced several hundred people. That we made the request for, you know, that FEMA, the Presidential Disaster Declaration, didn't get it. So every year, our state sees these major disasters that impact low-income individuals that don't rise to a level to get FEMA, let alone your point, which is a very accurate and, you know, thing to be concerned about. But I absolutely think there's already a big, you know, there's hundreds, if not thousands of people who lose, low-income individuals who lose their housing and everything every year that aren't lucky enough to be under a larger disaster to get that federal support. And there's nothing of really substance, or, you know, nothing that's significant. And those are even harder cases sometimes for attorneys to take, because there's not much to work with, especially, you know, if someone didn't have insurance, which is most of the people, all of the folks are responding to. It's a lot of uninsured or underinsured people anyways. But yes, it will be a problem if FEMA doesn't exist, or if FEMA's current flexibilities that they can have now go away. Like, it's been difficult, this disaster. We often tell folks, you know, it's very likely that the application deadline will be extended. It's very likely that they accept late appeals, because that has always been the case, and it's just a little bit more of an unknown right now what that will all look like. So it's a very real point.
And I just want to note we're at 1, and at least Skip might have to hop off, but we have at least one more question. So Skip, if you can stay, or just maybe if Jenny, if you want to stay, but I'd like.
I have flexibility.
One more question, yeah.
Yeah, so this is I mean, Jenny, you mentioned the inability to use IOLTA or EAF funding for some of this work, and I can understand why EAF would present a problem, because in your application you had to identify a discernible set of activities that would be funded by the EAF dollars. But IOLTA, as long as you're providing an eligible service to an eligible client, I would think that State Bar staff, if you in your application identified the 23 or however many counties in Northern California that you serve, I would think that if State Bar staff needed to modify that so that you could provide services outside those counties, you could do that with IOLTA dollars, I would think. Now, I could be wrong on that. I know you couldn't do it with EAF dollars because you would have not proposed that as a discernible set of activities, but I would think you could use IOLTA dollars for that, unless State Bar tells me, staff tells me I'm wrong.
I think that question was for Jenny, and I don't want to, Jenny, I can speak as from the State Bar staff side about like what the current restrictions are and something we've proposed to loosen them. But Jenny, the question was to you, so I'll let you answer, and then
Well,
I can follow up.
You should probably speak to the current issue, but I actually think for our EAF spending, that I mean, that my disaster role is written into it, and so there might that might also be there. But I did at first. I thought you were saying it. I may have misunderstood you at first, and then I came back around. We do ordinarily use both of those sources when we're doing disaster work in our own service area. But yeah, the question was really about if or how that can be used to support folks in other counties. And so maybe, Chris, you want to tie in the restriction or the where we're feeling the hang up.
Yeah, actually, this is a really great case study for how the commission through this committee can try to advance public legal access to civil justice funding, public policy in something like the space of disaster legal services. So for IOLTA grants, which the restrictions for those live in the Business and Professions Code, what the IOLTA funding formula provides by statute is that each applicant gets an allocation to serve a particular county. So of course they can apply to serve multiple counties, but essentially the IOLTA grant is the sum of the counties that they'll be serving, and the dollars that they get to serve, say, LA County, are supposed, on the basis of LA County's poverty population, are supposed to serve only those residents. And if they try to use the dollars they got for LA and Orange County, so we call it out of county spending, which is not allowed. It also wouldn't count towards their like size of award in the next year. So if you get funding to serve a particular county, you're supposed to spend on that county. But this is a really, really good example of how this commission can work with LAC and the state bar and others to propose to the legislature that maybe there be an exception to this dollars must be spent in the county for which they're given to you in the case of natural disasters, so that QLIS, so qualified legal services projects, for example, could help out other legal aid providers in other counties with their IOLTA funds. So even though they got the funds for, say, LA, NLSLA could go up to Sacramento County and use their LA dollars in an emergency to help respond to a natural disaster, or vice versa. LISNIC can come down and use some of their IOLTA funding for Sacramento County and help provide services in LA in an emergency, and not have it count against their award size in the next year. I saw Dwan popped in. I don't know if Dwan wanted to add anything. We actually support this, exploring this quite enthusiastically.
And I think Chris is gonna
Oh, Skip, I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Skip. Skip's hopping off. I just
Sorry, I have to drop off. Thank you for the
Thank you, Skip.
opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
sorry,
Thanks,
I was
Skip.
in the attending pool. I've
Thank
been doing something else, but I've been listening. I just wanted to add, and I think Chris is going to go over this during his Ledge update. We have already actually crafted some language to advance the legislature with LAC support, and they have reviewed it. And I think this is like, we have consensus support in terms of like being more flexible, but this is a really good example where I think like this committee could do more of that type of policy work. So there's obviously a funding request that we think probably should be attached to the disaster relief that we would love to advance this year in some capacity with LAC. But I think there are also a lot of policy kind of opportunities that we can do, and we do rely on like programs on the ground, advocates on the ground, because for this particular statutory change, Jenny's organization had reached out to us and elevated that this was an issue and that they wanted to deploy staff, and they would do it regardless, but it would be helpful if we could be more flexible. They can count it towards their qualified expenditures. So it was like a little bit of an easy, this was an easy policy decision, and we wouldn't know about it otherwise from our advocates. So I think this is a great committee to kind of talk about these issues and to have programs come and let us know how we can help better support them.
Thanks, Dwan.
And the last thing I'll
and
say
Chris,
is, Ken had it spot on that EAF funds a more defined project that they propose and through their budget for the next year's grant. But IOLTA is very flexible in that they can pivot how they spend those dollars, but they do have that statutory restriction that on like the county they spend them in. But State Bar staff would say absolutely pivot as long as you're still providing free civil legal services to indigent Californians. That is supposed to be a very flexible core funding for legal aid. IOLTA, yeah, we wouldn't like say you had to spend them on something that you thought might be needed and before the year began, and then halfway through the year there's a natural disaster. We would say absolutely pivot if you need to.
Great, thank you. Did we lose Jenny? No, we still have her. Great. I know, Jenny, we've kept you 8 minutes longer than we promised we would, but we are incredibly grateful that you and Skip were here. This kind of policy change and flexibility is exactly why this committee exists, so that we can come up with new innovative ways to really help the legal aid community. I mean, that's why we're all here. And so we're so grateful that you brought this to us and took the time out of what I'm sure is a very, very busy schedule to bring this to us. This will not be the last you hear from us on it. I am certain of that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good one.
Jacqueline, did you want to say something
Oh,
to Jenny?
I'm here.
I thought
Yes.
you were-
Yes,
Sorry.
just very quickly, thank you, Jennifer, and to Skip as well. A really great discussion. I really like the perspectives and the vision that you presented, especially about this long-term planning, because that's something that we really need for disasters, so that we can, in between disasters, we can be building capacity all year long, so that when we have these major disasters, we're ready to go. So I love that. Thank you so much. Great work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jenny.
You're welcome. Thanks.
So
Bye.
Judge Rossi, I do have the resolution ready. I couldn't remember. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite remember if the committee wanted to keep discussing it kind of felt like maybe we could come to a natural conclusion, but I have the resolution ready for the charter if it's time. If the committee needed though more time to talk about it, I would say maybe we take that vote at the end. But if the committee's like, no, we're ready, we can do the vote now and then proceed. So it's up to you.
Okay.
Oh,
I don't.
I'm so sorry. Before we go back to the charter, can I just add one more comment on the disaster point? Because Dewan mentioned there's like maybe a new legislative proposal or new language out there to address this. I would be really interested in seeing that, and just curious if like weighing in on the proposed legislation is something this committee might agendize, or you know, even not just as an individual, I'd be really interested in looking at that.
Yeah, I have it. The last
lost
item
Dawn.
on the agenda is
Okay.
ledge update, and I have it in my talking points to
Perfect.
present on it. Yeah, but I'll make a note that you'd be interested in seeing the actual proposal like when it's ready to share, and so we don't lose that. Okay.
Do commission members need more time on the charter, or do you want to take a quick vote on it now? Anybody else have? No, I'm not seeing anybody. We can do it now. I don't see anybody saying I need more time, so maybe we just do it now. And I see that Jennifer is here to talk on our next point too. So let's do the vote quickly, and then because there's only 4 of us, so it won't take very long to do a roll call vote on that.
Perfect. I do have a slide with the resolution on it, so I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
And pull up my voting spreadsheet.
There we go.
Okay. So hopefully you can see the proposed resolution. I'll just read it aloud. Should the committee concur, it is resolved that the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission Program Development and Impact Committee, PDI Committee, recommends that the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission approve the PDI Committee's charter as presented and modified at the committee's meeting on February 7th, 2025. That's the resolution. I did just accept those changes, the clause that Aaron suggested for the end of the evaluations paragraph. I accepted those. That's essentially what staff would be posting for the meeting on the February 28th. Okay.
And Chris, how do you want to address those 2 just administrative points in the membership paragraph?
What I would propose, we can wordsmith this resolution if you want to capture it here, but what I would propose is we just bring it, Judge Rossi and I bring that to the executive committee meeting. The executive committee is not planning to vote on the charters, I believe, but they wanted an update on what they all look like before the commission sees them. And we bring it to the meeting next Friday and raise it there.
Okay, so pass this at it as is, and then you all share kind of a recommendation that the executive committee look at all the charters across the board for those couple points and maybe make a
The
small...
membership ranges, and do we need like a clause that says something like, but in the event the commission can change this, in the event of a vacancy or something. Yeah. So we would need a motion and a second to consider this resolution.
I'll move.
I'll second. Oh,
Thank you. So I have Commissioner Smith moving, and then I heard 2 seconds. Who would like to second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Jacqueline. All right. Alakani,
Yes.
Babcock,
Yes.
Campbell, absent. Escobedo, absent. Morales, absent. Smith,
Yes.
and Judge Rossi.
Yes.
That's 4 yays, 0 nays, 0 abstentions, 3 members were absent, and the motion does pass.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it back over to you, Judge Rossi, to keep us
I
walking
think
through the
that
agenda.
Jennifer sound like is next, right, on our agenda. Jennifer, I see you on the screen. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Nice to see everyone. Let me share my screen.
Great. And while you're doing that, Jennifer, can I just sort of like tee you up a little bit here.
Please do.
Great. So we are, like I mentioned at the beginning, we are going to move Kim's, thank you, Kim, for your flexibility, move Kim's agenda item, which is the recommendation with respect to HP4's reallocation, to after this series of potential priorities for the commission and this committee this year and maybe next year. So you just heard about disaster legal services as a suggested priority, and now Jennifer's going to present on another one. You're going to hear about four different topics today, and it's to get you, same thing, it's about 10 minutes of presentation, 10 minutes of discussion, to get you thinking about like what's most important for the commission this year.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Jennifer Zelnick. I am a lead program analyst in the Office of Access and Inclusion. And today I'm going to talk about one potential priority for the PDI committee for 2025, which is a legal technology initiative for the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission grantees. Okay, so I'm really excited to present about the work that OA&I has done on legal technology and artificial intelligence. The goal of this slide is for me to do a little table setting to frame our conversation. So I want to start by thinking through the connection between legal technology, generative AI, and access to justice. Then discuss the work that staff have done to advance access to justice through legal technology, and end with a conversation to help the committee think about its role in this work moving forward. So very broadly, legal technology is any tool used for legal work. And the good ones are designed to make legal work easier. So this includes things like case management systems, platforms like Westlaw and Casetext, etc. All of our grantees use Smart Simple, which is our grants management platform, and we can consider this to be legal technology as well. Artificial intelligence is a broad term about different technologies that are designed to essentially mimic human intelligence. So when we talk about generative artificial intelligence or Gen AI, it's a subtype of artificial intelligence where the tools generate new content. So that is text very often, but it can also be through images, sounds, and even motion picture. So many companies have developed generative AI tools that are designed to be used by lawyers or people working in law. And some companies have also designed tools for self-represented litigants. Additionally, some people have found ways to use general Gen AI tools like ChatGPT, which you may have heard of, for legal work. So how does this connect to the commission? The 2019 California Justice Gap study found that Californians receive no or inadequate help for 85% of their civil legal problems. You all know that the commission's mission is to close the justice gap by increasing equitable access to legal services for low-income and underserved communities in California. And as legal technology and Gen AI proliferate in the private bar, there's potential that the gap between services and resources available for those who can afford attorneys versus those who cannot may continue to grow. So there's potential that these tools can increase the justice gap. However, by responsibly deploying legal tech and Gen AI, legal aid has the opportunity to potentially serve more Californians and even potentially help shrink California's justice gap. So now I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to talk about some of our office's major legal tech and Gen AI initiatives to date. Again, a small team of staff have been doing this work. We've been monitoring national and international developments in legal tech and Gen AI since about mid-2023. We've also been meeting with developers and companies, academics, innovators, attending conferences and workshops, all in the service of learning about what is out there and what might make sense for grantees. So in the next few slides, I'll share some of the major outcomes of this work. The first was what we call the October convening. In October 2023, in partnership with LAC and the Judicial Council, our office hosted a day-long convening for grantees on emerging trends to harness access to justice. The morning's events focused on Gen AI, specifically a live demo of several currently available tools and a panel discussion on how legal aid organizations can utilize Gen AI and legal tech in their work. And importantly, two of the presenters were researchers from Berkeley. And through working with them on the October convening, we've had some additional collaborations. Most importantly, we helped facilitate our grantees' participation in a really groundbreaking study. The study was published last month in the Loyola of Los Angeles Law Review Journal. So briefly, it was the first of its kind study. It involved giving 91 California legal aid attorneys free access to what are otherwise paid Gen AI tools, and giving a random subset of these participants what the researchers called concierge support services to help reduce the burden of becoming familiar with these tools. The study was really informative. It found that 90% of participants reported increased productivity with the tools, and 3/4 reported intent to continue using those tools. The study also found that whereas beforehand, men were 2 to 3 times more likely to already be using these tools, after the pilot, usage of Gen AI tools was the same for both men and women. In other words, it eliminated the gender gap for participants. So we found all of this to be really interesting and quite promising for the potential for legal aid attorneys to use these tools. Okay, and now I want to talk about a few other projects, pilots and other tech collaborations. So briefly, in 2023, we coordinated a pilot with CoCounsel that was for 6 weeks. 21 grantees participated alongside staff. We are currently doing a pilot with VLEX. This is a longer pilot, so it's for 3 months, and it's also a much bigger group. 40 grantees are participating, as well as 20 state bar staff across the state bar. Before beginning the pilots, we engaged grantees in a survey to assess their current knowledge and needs. And we met with each company to help structure the pilots, including grantee onboarding and ongoing support. This next section of projects, we've also facilitated grantees' participation in both the CoCounsel AI for Justice Legal Innovators program and EverLaw for Good. These programs provide free access to both of these tools, which are otherwise paid products. And we have been lucky that although both of these programs were open nationally, our grantees have been accepted into both. And then just wanted to note that our organization of these pilots and working with these companies to facilitate our grantees free access is part of a strategy to increase our grantees' knowledge and usage of these tools, facilitate group and peer learning, and strategize about how to facilitate potentially in the future, whether we can help grantees get the best deal so that they can afford these tools at lower costs. Finally, I wanted to touch in this slide on a collaboration we have with the Stanford Law School's Legal Design Lab. The goal of this project is to demonstrate proof of concept for a statewide tool to direct the public to the appropriate legal service provider, including creating a client profile, identifying the legal issues to be solved, and ensuring a warm handoff to a geographically, linguistically, and financially appropriate provider. We've gone to a lot of events with Stanford Law School's Legal Design Lab. We're really excited about this collaboration, and they're really great thought partners. And then finally, the last project I want to talk about is what we call the Legal Ops Technology and AI RFP. This RFP was a large project for the state bar broadly and our office specifically. The side of the project related to the Office of Access and Inclusion is designed to assess operational efficiency, including tech and AI, for all of the state bar's grantees. We designed an assessment with a pilot cohort of 6 grantees with diverse tech needs and capacities, org sizes and locations, and other factors such as legal specialization. So the consultants are working to develop a plan for our office to launch what we are calling a statewide legal tech initiative. This initiative is designed broadly to provide technical assistance to grantees, help grantees utilize recommended Gen AI tools and other legal tech, all in service, again, of increasing their operational efficiency so that they can serve more clients and support their staff. The consultants will also help develop comprehensive training and sustainability plans to ensure that we can really support grantees in these goals in the long term. And they're also helping us think about the staffing needs for this project. So we're really, really excited about working with these consultants. The work is ongoing. We anticipate that it might be done in April, and we will keep you posted on that. So now I want to just open up the discussion, and I've posed 2 questions here to get us started. What would the PDI committee recommend staff prioritize or consider while designing the statewide legal tech initiative? And would the committee be interested in supporting the development of the statewide legal tech initiative? But I also just want to open the floor because I know that I've shared a lot of information. Perhaps some of it is new for some commissioners, to see if there are any questions.
And again, while you think of your questions, the goal of this kind of like quick first reactions conversation is just to get you thinking about this as a potential priority for the commission and this committee in the next year or so. So I think what Jennifer, like, all first impressions and reactions are welcome.
Well, I think to question number 2, I mean, would this committee be interested? I think that I'll speak for me, but I'm gonna guess that my fellow commissioners will say the same, which is that absolutely this is the kind of innovation that that this committee is hoping to bring to legal aid to try and address the justice gap. And so, in my opinion, this is the kind of stuff that we should be supporting. This committee should be supporting. And I'm just really impressed with all the work you've already done. And now I know who to call if I have AI questions.
Thank you.
But do other folks? Ken, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Judge Rossi, that I think this is something that our committee would want to support in terms of the second bullet point. With regards to the first bullet point, I have a question for you, Jennifer. Did I hear you correctly that one of the things you were looking at in one of the various steps along the way with some of the work that's already been done was how you might facilitate the sort of maybe large scale purchasing and or cost savings for programs, so individual programs weren't going out and having to decide on their own, like, okay, gee, which of these various different vendors do we deal with? Who, what do we know? What do I know as a grantee about generative AI? And do I have to learn all this from scratch? And And maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that's been done there.
Sure, that's a great question. So what we envision really is for this legal tech initiative to take on a hub and spoke model approach. And just to further the wheel metaphors, we don't want grantees to have to constantly reinvent the wheel. We know that organizations sometimes have 5 staff, sometimes have several hundred, but that doesn't mean that they have technologists on staff. It doesn't mean that they have people who know about Gen AI, because we know that even some really good IT departments aren't involved in this work. So we want to create a system whereby we're not necessarily saying you have to use this or this is the only right tool, but where we can guide grantees, broadly speaking, towards some tools that make sense for legal aid organizations or some best practices so that they can make decisions for what works for their organization. Another part of this would be thinking about if there are ways for us to help grantees, again, secure lower costs for these tools, because we know that some of these tools are very expensive. I hope that it was clear from my slides that there are companies that are really invested in getting these tools to our programs, either for free for as long as a year, or sometimes they're willing, they have pricing opportunities for nonprofits. That being said, we know that funds are really limited right now. We know that some funding sources have gone away and there's concern about others. So we want to make sure that we can help grantees implement these new technologies in as efficiently as possible. We think that ultimately they can offer some cost savings and reduce burden on staff, but we don't want there to feel like there's a bad trade-off. And we know from speaking to companies that if a large group of grantees were to be interested in the same tool, they would be able to negotiate a lower price. So I think that that's something that we're exploring, certainly.
Got it. And then one last question. Would it be possible to share a link to the Loyola Law article that summarized the study results?
Definitely. I can work with Chris to get that to all of you.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's great. Erin?
Yeah, I also share Judge Rossi and Ken's reaction to your second question, that yes, I think that it would be great for this committee to advise or be involved in whatever way is helpful to you. And thank you so much for your work on this. I had maybe one clarifying question and then two to take Chris's invitation for off-the-cuff reactions. My clarifying question is, it sounds like what you've been looking at is using AI for legal aid providers' internal use to kind of increase their productivity, as opposed to what some people are starting to talk about of trying to figure out how to responsibly use AI for clients to do their own legal work, right? If they don't have a lawyer. So more of this kind of self-represented litigant, self-help kind of use of AI. So I just wanted to maybe pause there and just make sure that that understanding is generally correct, what you're talking about.
So I would say in terms of the work that we've done with grantees, you're absolutely correct. But our staff are staying abreast of the tools for self-represented litigants. And we are following those trends very closely. We're also following the regulation. So we think it's really important to understand how things like UPL or other legal regulations are impacting legal tech broadly, because a lot of states are regulating it, but also how the regulation of legal technology is impacting what's available for self-represented litigants specifically.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, that sounds right to me, to definitely keep abreast of what's happening there and have your finger on the pulse. I guess my two, maybe three off the cuff reactions are, keep up the good work. Sounds great. And also just because that there are, other folks kind of looking at this. I was just today, in fact, looking at the Access to Justice Network. They have, it looks like a couple of standing committees that have been looking at AI. And so you're nodding. So, you obviously are aware of all this, but like to not recreate the wheel or to try to, leverage and, find synergies and work that other people are doing. So we're not duplicating or rather amplifying what other folks are doing and collaborating as much as possible to just kind of get as far along as we can without, recreating the wheel. So that's just one reaction. And then back to my point during the disasters conversation, AI is great. And and I know LAC has been doing work forever on, rural access to justice and just trying to get the highly populated urban area lawyers to help people in rural areas, just like kind of distribute our legal services through the state better to places where we have, legal services deserts almost, and to help out, Lisnick and all their rural communities. So it sounds like that's not really within the scope of that, but maybe just for this committee to keep in mind that like old school technology like telephones and Zoom can also be, I think, a really important part of the access to justice, puzzle.
Thank you, Erin. I completely agree. And I'll just say that we do keep an eye on tech more broadly within this team. And it's something that we're very attuned to as well.
And then let's see, Jacqueline has raised her hand, and then I'll submit to Judge Rossi, the chair, if we want for that to be the last question, so we can.
Yeah, we probably should, because I don't want to. I know State Bar staff is here waiting patiently.
Yeah, although everyone was super nice. All the remaining speakers were super nice in articulating their flexibility. But yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly reiterate what has already been said. I think it's definitely something that our committee should be supporting. I'm fully in support of that. And I like the work that's been done and the great overview presentation. Regarding the first bullet point, I hope that, I think this is a great opportunity for maybe to encourage collaboratives with major academic research centers to, help to provide services to the grantees and customizing technology to meet their needs, and to also just to help them figure out and analyze their needs. I mean, being someone myself who was affiliated with the computer science and research institution of a local university, major university. There's lots of resources at these academic research centers at the universities that can be taken advantage of. They also often offer case development assistance to community organizations that need help and apply. And so I love it. I think it sounds really great. A lot of opportunities.
Thank you. Well, then maybe I'll put on my last slide and just invite everyone to reach out if you have questions. But I'll turn things back over to you, Judge Rossi.
Thanks, Jennifer. And again, really incredible work that you have already done and are doing on this. And you heard from everyone here that we will partner in any way that works for you. So thank you so much for being here and for doing all of this work.
Thanks. Happy to help.
Great. Okay. I see next, Sylvia, you are next on our hit parade of new and innovative ideas that we're going to talk about today.
Thank you. All right. So are you able to see my slides? Okay. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Sylvia Naum. I'm a senior program analyst in the Office of Access and Inclusion. I'll provide some background on the work that OA&I staff has been doing to support LSTFC grantees in light of a changing policy landscape, as well as disaster legal assistance needs following the fires in Southern California. Specifically for today, I'll be highlighting a grantee survey with questions for the committee on how it would like to see the survey data used. So some background. Last fall, the State Bar began organizing a series of touch points with grantees in anticipation of a changing policy landscape. And a few weeks earlier, in November, the governor had issued a proclamation on protecting vulnerable Californians, which included an opportunity for additional EAF funds. So as you all know, SB X1-2 passed the Assembly a few days ago on February 3rd, and it provides an additional $10 million in EAF funding. So as part of these efforts, in December 2024, OA&I convened 2 focus groups with 30 legal aid organizations that provide primarily immigration services to ask questions such as, what are organizations' biggest worries about the changing policy landscape? Another question was, what is your organization doing to prepare for these challenges and changes? A third question was, what can the State Bar do to enhance public protection for California immigrants alongside partners like LAC? How might your organization use additional funds, if any, were made available for Californians who are immigrants or members of another marginalized group? And so from these focus groups, the insights and the perspectives were incredibly granular, they were rich, and they're wide-ranging, from innovative rapid response models deployed on the border to preparing Know Your Rights materials that meet broader needs, given the constrained, the limited capacity of frontline staff. And so based on the focus group findings and to scale grantee responses, we distributed a survey to all 115 grantees working across legal areas beyond immigration, including and beyond immigration. And so the goal was to gather and further assess the kind of support LSTFC and the State Bar could provide and recommend together. And then with the fires in Southern California in January, OA&I decided to add a few questions related to disaster legal assistance as well. So the broader aim of the survey is for organizations to identify constraints, capacities, and priorities towards helping the commission effectively assess grantee needs, as well as to help the State Bar refine and enhance its support. The survey is comprised of approximately 20 questions in the 4 major categories that you see on the slide. So under services and inquiries, the survey asks, for example, please identify the 4 most urgent types of services requested by clients. A question under anticipated policy impacts include, what potential federal policy changes do you think will have the greatest impact on your clients? And so here's another sample survey question. So under preparation and planning, respondents were asked about their efforts to increase or modify their current service delivery model, or potentially bolster their staffing or collaboration efforts. And finally, in the last category, strategy and support, respondents were asked to provide figures on IOLTA EAF funds that their organizations would need to either maintain or increase civil legal assistance services to indigent Californians, with questions specifically tailored to disaster legal assistance providers and homelessness prevention needs. So the survey just closed a few days ago. We received 74 responses from 74 organizations, and of those 74 organizations, 57 were QLSPs and 16 were support centers. And this represents roughly 64% of all grantees. The plan is to present a very preliminary take on the survey results during a virtual roundtable that's scheduled for this Monday, February 10th, and to use that time to further our conversations with grantees to refine that data. So essentially to present to them what they shared with us, and then to together refine what those data points say, and also to ensure that everybody knows what those data points are, to either enhance with more insights or potentially to think about new categories for further questions. And then to provide, and the final step is to provide more refined updates during in-person convenings scheduled for March in both San Francisco and LA. So OA&I staff are still doing the analysis, but I wanted to share a few interesting data points that came up. And unfortunately, because of the timing of the slides, I'm not able to share with the visuals. So hopefully the verbal representation does justice to what we found. So 68% of survey respondents, our grantees, reported an increase in the request for services since last fall, since November 2024. Of these respondents, 35% reported an increase of 10 to 25%, and another 27% of respondents reported an increase of 26 to 50%. So another way to put it is that of those who said that they've seen increases in requests for services, 62% who responded in the affirmative said that they've seen service request increases from moderate to essentially incredibly high. There are obviously some big capacity implications to those sorts of responses, as well as longstanding concerns about staff retention and recruitment in legal aid. The other figure that's notable, but perhaps not entirely surprising, is that immigration and housing issues were the most common areas of law. So 84% of requests for services were for immigration legal needs, and 42% were for housing needs. So just wanted to share those two data points, and we look forward to sharing more of our findings with the Commission and this committee in the coming weeks. So the two questions that I wanted to pose to the committee here are, one, what are actionable next steps that the PDI committee would like to see in how the survey data is used? And two, how might these next steps help inform the committee's immediate, medium, and long-term goals or needs for this area of work?
While you think about that, I'll just say, like, there's a very good chance we are going to be keeping the committee's March meeting. So the next time this committee meeting, I think, might be March 21st. And like this data will be like, you'll hear about it likely at the commission meeting, but we can really dig into it if you want in March. But unless you find it hard to speculate without having seen more of the data or something.
Thoughts from commissioners for Sylvia? Thank you, Sylvia, for presenting all of this and even having that data available for us on such short notice. I appreciate that. I don't see.
I guess it's a little hard to. I'm not remotely surprised to hear there's an increase in requests for services. It's a little hard to know, I guess, without having the report you're going to release preliminarily on Monday. What else is in there to know how we might be able to use it going forward, but certainly interested in supporting the grantees and whatever they're saying are the current needs.
Yes, so the questions were a combination of quantitative questions as well as more narrative based. And so we're currently coding the narrative responses from executive directors in terms of their concerns. And it supports some of the quantitative figures that I showed you. And happy to share further as we refine that analysis.
Yeah, I think we would love in our next meeting to be able to see some of what you've come up with. Ken, you have thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is a little hard, given where you are in your process, Sylvia, for us to answer definitively the questions you posed. But I do think the idea of us looking on a somewhat regular basis at input from the grantee community is incredibly important. That information should really help guide a lot of our work. And so I'm glad that you're doing the work that you're doing. And I just think the timing of this meeting is just a little, that doesn't quite exactly jive with where you are in terms of your work process. So I think it's something that we're going to definitely want to talk about at a future meeting.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you, Sylvia, for being here. And we will certainly hear more from you soon, it sounds like, and sounds like you also have a ton of work to do in the meantime. So thank you for that.
Thank you all.
I want to sort of gauge how the commissioners and state bar staff and liaisons are feeling. We have one more presentation from Crystal, who I see here on the screen. But if folks are feeling like they want to take 5 minutes to stretch right now, we can do that, or we can power through. I am flexible and responsive to the needs of folks who are here on the call. So does anybody, if people want to break now or for 5 minutes, or do you want to power through and finish with the last one? Or you're going to make me make the decision?
Well, it's okay with me if we break now.
Okay, why don't we take, Chris, can we take like just 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Crystal, I
So
apologize. You've been
we might
sitting here
even
so
have
No
a
problem.
we might even have a slide. I don't know, Shannon, if we have a slide we can put up that says we'll be coming back at 1:55. If not, I'm just saying aloud for those listening.
Okay,
We're
I'm back
gonna
at 1:55.
Yeah, we'll be back at 1:55.
Okay, so
Thank you,
everyone take 5
Jojosi.
minutes to
Thank you,
stretch.
Crystal. See that we do have a quorum.
Great. All right, Crystal, thank you so much for your patience.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad to get the committee members after a quick break. I know there's been a lot of content from today's meeting. Let me go ahead and get started. I think this will be a pretty brief presentation, just continuing on the committee's discussion about its priorities for 2025. This is specifically about the reporting framework, which I know the committee had talked about a little bit more when it was going through the proposed charter. So I just wanted to capture those changes that were discussed during today's meeting. So slight edit to the slides, capturing the evaluation piece that Erin had brought up. But again, thinking about what was on the charter, explore ways to refine the Commission's reporting framework to reduce burdens on grantees, support transparency and mutual accountability, promote impactful communications with stakeholders, and reflect meaningful program evaluation. Below is bulleted a couple of high-level sort of sub-projects that we will be launching in this year. I think collectively it's the legal aid data project, just trying to put this goal into action and a couple of ways to achieve these goals. So currently, our grantees are required to submit evaluation reports. They're subject to specific reporting requirements as required by the grants, as required by specific data that the State Bar collects. They also submit these things called legal aid reports, which report across all funding sources, including State Bar and non-State Bar funding. Long story short, we have a lot of data. There's a lot of data being collected. There's a lot of data that grantees are submitting on a very regular basis. So with these goals in mind, we thought of an approach on how to try to achieve these goals. So one thought was to analyze the legal aid data collected over the past 5 years and report summary findings, including overall trends and service impacts, basically assessing the inventory of the data that we already have and putting it in a digestible format to share with the committee, to share with the commission, just so we can have that captured and a record of it. We would also propose inventorying current reporting and application requirements, taking a look across all of the grants, all of the reporting, and trying to identify which elements essentially are essential or not essential, what could be streamlined, what could reduce grantee burden, and taking a look at that side by side and consistency across all of the grants. We're also going to research how legal aid funders and philanthropic organizations assess grantee outcomes and impacts. Is the approach that the State Bar taking best practices? How does it relate, or how does it compare to other funders? And also keeping a broader perspective, what is the philanthropy world doing? Are there any practices that we could adopt in our own reporting framework? With that information and that background, I think the hope is to design a standardized reporting requirement template that would be used across all of our grants. So regardless if we get hopefully new funding for different reasons, the data that we collect is going to be meaningful, it's going to be essential, and we'll be able to tell us a story and create a through line. And then we want to also finally develop potential ways to use the data and communicate impact. I would have loved if the committee would like to see, we have created, and I think we've shared and previewed a couple of grant-specific fact sheets, I think for HP, EAF, the fellowship grants, which was sort of a combined effort with the commission as well as COAF too, and the things that we're able to do with the data and sort of visualize that and share that with legislatures, and also be responsive to legislative requests to advocate for additional funding. Those are just sort of the current ways we're doing it using our data. So sort of exploring the way, if we, with this updated reporting framework, and what else could we do, and other thoughts. So that was the very high level. The plan, sort of identifying next steps, is to present a more detailed project plan of what this looks like in action at the February 28 commission meeting. So I'll be presenting a little more comprehensive overview of those specific steps and what those tasks would involve. And then after that commission meeting, we'll be doing those specific projects, taking a look at the 5-year look back, inventorying the current grantee data, researching under other funders and best practices. And then we'll also be just making sure that we're considering and factoring the grantee perspective and other stakeholder perspective. We will be relaunching the stakeholder working group to serve sort of as an advisory and sounding board, just to have regular feedback moments to get perspectives, and then thinking that PDI committee would be our also regular touch point to report back on all of the progress we've made so far, some of the findings, getting the commission perspective on some potential changes before they're presented to the larger commission. I also had discussion questions, just because we're looking for consistency across our presentations. I'd love to hear from the perspectives of those who have participated in past committees, past application review, anything related to data, grantee data, as well as those who are just joining the committee. I think it'd be interesting to get some thoughts of these two initial questions. Our first one is, what grantee data have you found the most useful to inform decision making? The second one is, what grantee data do you wish you had access to or more information about, and why? Happy to go back to a couple of past slides, but this is the end of my main presentation.
Thanks, Crystal. Commissioners have thoughts. Some of us are newer to the commission than others, but Ken has his hand up.
So, Crystal, thank you for your presentation. I can't, as a new member of the commission, I can't really say what has been useful to inform my decision making, because I have made very few decisions so far. But I do know, as a prior grantee, that I provided lots of information to the staff, and I always sort of wondered, like, where does that information go and what happens to it? And I don't remember, and I'm, relatively tied into this stuff, and I'm a member of the Access to Justice Commission's funding committee, and I don't remember seeing a lot of reported data from the Trust Fund Commission or from the Office of Access and Inclusion about what grantees were reporting. Maybe a few bits and pieces of high level information. And it seems to me that it would be helpful to have more access to information, but information is going to be helpful to us, and not just information for the sake of giving us information, if that makes any sense. And I don't know, as I sit here right now, what that information is going to be as I sit in my role as a commissioner, but I don't want staff or grantees to have to go through a lot of busy work that isn't going to benefit the ultimate process that the commission engages in. At the same time, if you've got information that would be helpful to us, I would certainly like to see it.
Yeah, Ken, that's a good point, and I will say, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of seeing the data in bits and pieces. our focus has been a lot on our reporting and our compliance. So a lot of the data actually gets reported to Judicial Council or our other partners for those purposes. But in terms of the communicating impact and sharing that with the commission and the grantees, I think at the strategic meeting last February, there was a very strong feeling that the data and the impact should be communicated more meaningfully from this commission. And so yeah, I agree with all that you're saying. I'm happy to share some of those fact sheets just so you can see visually. Like we have used a lot of the data for the HP, especially because I know those were intensive. So if that would be a helpful reference, just to sort of like see the maybe a visual or an example of non-report ways or that we've used the reporting data.
That'd be helpful.
I was
Oh,
going to say,
sorry,
and,
Chris.
Jennifer had a link she wanted me to circulate after the meeting. So I think that's an amazing idea. Like, why don't I attach the fact sheets that all of the grantees' data have gone into that was shared with members of the legislature to justify future funding, especially for like HP, because that's not a gimme every year. That's like if the legislature has to re-up that each time. Homelessness
Yeah.
prevention is HP.
Oh, sorry, Jacqueline. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Thank you, Crystal, for that very helpful overview. One of the things I'm very interested in terms of grantee data, I'd like to hear, being a consumer myself and having applied for assistance from the programs that we fund in the past. I'd like to hear more from the actual people, from the actual consumers who benefit from these programs. I'd like to hear more about the success stories, more about situations that were not necessarily, the outcomes were not so successful, or for people who applied for assistance and we were and the grantees were not able to provide assistance to them, what those numbers look like. I just want to hear from the actual consumers. I want more information about that. I think it can be a big plus in a lot of ways because I understand that the programs are helping a lot of people out in the community, and there's a lot of people that need help, and a lot more people going to be needing help now in the face of all these disasters. So that would be really great to see some of those visuals and hear from some of those actual consumers. I think it would be exciting to actually have a couple of them present or something, tell us a story.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I will say we do collect a couple of client vignettes and on our Safer annual report, which I think, Chris, thank you for sharing in advance. We can link to. I think we did have a couple of spotlights of client stories from a couple of our grantees in last year's report, and we're planning to do the same in the upcoming report. So yeah, agreed.
And even though we have so many new commissioners on this committee, like at least two of you are former executive directors, right, of a sports center at QLSP. So I actually think that your depth of knowledge on this particular public policy question, whether and how to refine the reporting framework, is like perfect for this committee's work this year, because you've experienced it on the other side.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was.
Go ahead, Erin. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say exactly that. I mean, I absolutely love all the policy and big picture things we've been talking about. But honestly, in terms of the day-to-day as an executive director of a support center, you just live and breathe the reporting. So I have a lot of views on this. Crystal, I think you're just doing such a fantastic job. You may remember from the November meeting, I really liked what you had done on the IOLTA reporting. And I just really applaud the way that you're coming at this of trying to both reduce the burden on the grantees and increase the meaningfulness and the impact and the communication of it. So I really support that, and I'm happy to participate, especially on the support center side. Since I think I have that application like still imprinted in my brain. Like Ken, it's hard to say which piece of information and all of that data that we gave you every year is most helpful to the commission. I'm actually really interested in going through that process myself and seeing that. And I just wanted to really echo what Jacqueline was saying about information from clients, consumers of legal services is another really important perspective to be bringing and having the commission hear about.
Great, thanks, Erin. Chris, I don't know if I could do an informal call for now, but just that stakeholder working group I was talking about, I think we were anticipating or contemplating that maybe a couple, maybe one or two members of the PDI committee would might be interested. I can share more information about that after the meeting, but we were hoping to get maybe that perspective in the conversation for those more detailed in the weeds types of discussions.
That's totally appropriate.
Okay,
you know, and why, yeah. And while this does conclude our lineup of like 4 areas for potential priorities for the commission and this committee in the next year or two, and which priorities the commission adopts for this committee to implement, when it essentially adopts like the implementation plan. I think this committee will have the opportunity to sort of inform that, but I think we were thinking that the reporting framework is probably one that's almost a must-have, because it's just been on the to-do list for so long, is to take a good look at that and make sure it's optimal. And so I'm like very optimistic that will be picked. And you heard about some as an area of priority, and you've heard about 3 others, and there are yet more. But we obviously just picked 4 for today because it's, we just wanted to get you starting to think about it. But if there's other things you want us to think about, let us know.
One quick comment. So I was actually on the working group that developed the major benefits report back many years ago. And it's a beast. I never enjoyed preparing that report as a grantee. And I oftentimes wondered, like, why did I agree to all of the things that goes into this massive report, which takes forever to complete? So I'm very happy that this is going to be one of the things we'll look at, and that staff is going to take a good look at. I think it's a healthy thing to periodically look at these kinds of things and improve where we can.
Well, great. Judge Rossi, that does conclude the staff presentations for this agenda item. Thank you so much, Crystal.
Thank you, Crystal. Appreciate you being here and your help. Tim, you have been here so patiently. And I know we sort of touched on briefly at the beginning the next item that we needed to vote on, which was the reallocation. And we did briefly talk about whether this was something that this committee would be doing in the future, but it seems like it might be something that we want to talk about at least doing this one time.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Judge. Hello, commissioners. It's wonderful to be part of this inaugural PDI committee meeting. Kim Turner, Senior Program Analyst. I can share slides, Chris, if that's most helpful.
Thank you. That'd be great. I have them in case you any issues, but yeah.
No worries. Okay, let's get the slideshow going. All right.
And we don't want to lose time on this. So I don't think it's going to be this committee. This committee is going to be new policies, new funds. And this is very much old funds. But yeah, thank you for giving it a home until the commission decides how to handle it on the 28th.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, I think we'll be quite brief here. So I am lucky to work on the HP funds as grant lead. Really pleased to have joined the State Bar a little over 6 months ago. And I am here today for this item 1.2 to recommend delegation of authority to reallocate remaining HP4 grant funds. So again, this will be pretty brief, and you have a memo in the materials about this. I will share just a little bit of background and then recommend the delegation of authority. We'll have a proposed resolution, and of course can always take questions as needed. And I know Chris too is an HP expert, so I will also send any questions over to him if we want to talk even more. So the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission and Homelessness Prevention Funds Committee approved 63 HP4 grants totaling over $28 million, $28,500,000 to be exact. Those were 46 initial awards with a bit over 25 million in that round, and then 17 supplemental awards over 3 million in that round. And those 46 initial awards working on homelessness prevention issues began back in January of 2023, January 1st, and then supplemental awards with the remaining funds began in July of that same year. The grant period for both types of those awards ended actually last year, June 30th, 2024. So that had wrapped up. A little bit more background leading to this request for delegation of authority. 11 HP4 awardees had a total of $1,007,981 remaining at the end of the grant period. So the state bar has that fund or that money that we want to make sure can benefit homelessness prevention. And we also estimate that we have up to $170,000 remaining in funds to administer HP4 awards potentially available to reallocate. So staff is now today recommending that we reallocate these funds, the $1,007,981 and the $170,000. We would reallocate these funds given the high chance of changes to federal spending that we're hearing a lot about right now around, say, housing related programs, and that because there's a risk of increased homelessness for indigent Californians right now, just based on the federal changes alone, but also because of those natural disasters that we heard a lot during this meeting about that are indeed, again, enhancing the risk of homelessness that many folks are facing, particularly in Southern California. So staff is coming today to the committee to recommend that this committee seek a delegation of authority from the commission for the PDI committee to reallocate the remaining HP4 funds. And these funds would be spent by December 31st, 2025. So that is the nutshell of what we're talking about today. We understand that, yes, these processes may change over time given the charters are still being cemented. But for today, we wanted to have on the record that the committee would resolve in this manner to do this delegation of authority to reallocate the remaining HP4 funds. So I want to take any questions, obviously, before we talk about the resolution. Chris and others, anything to add on this front before perhaps we take questions from the committee?
The only thing I would just add is State Bar staff did check in with the Judicial Council of California, through whom these dollars flow for the commission to administer, and JC is supportive, the Judicial Council is supportive of reallocating them to the extent the authorizing statute allows, which we confirm that it does, to make sure they still go to preventing homelessness, especially for the reasons Kim mentioned, which is that there were some changes in the last few months from a natural disaster perspective, from a policy landscape perspective, that has already increased homelessness or risks increasing homelessness across the whole state. So even though it's not a ton of funding, this is something that, like, no matter how much effort it takes, it's worth getting these dollars back out there. Yeah, but I will flag, and this was mentioned in the memo, the State Bar will need to and has begun the process of amending its contract with the Judicial Council to make sure that we can reallocate these. So we have their support, but we will need to officially amend that contract, which we've begun doing.
Thank you, Chris. I see Aaron's hand is raised. Yeah, thank you,
Yeah,
Jen.
just a quick question, and this makes a lot of sense. I'm just wondering if the State Bar or Judicial Council has these dollars in hand already, or if they would need to be drawn down from the federal government. And if so, then how fast can we move?
The HP4 is state dollars, which is maybe the only reason we can reallocate them, because HP3 was federal, and you could, that one had a really strict must send these dollars back date. This one we were able to confer with other agencies to be able to do a potential reallocation. And we have invoiced already for the unspent funds. So they have come back. So they are ready to be sent back out again pursuant to a reallocation that this committee would oversee if the commission delegates this authority.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Aaron. Any other questions, comments? Okay. So barring any, oh yeah, please go ahead.
I'll move approval of the resolution.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So I believe I heard that Commissioner Babcock moved, and was it Commissioner Smith that seconded?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, Alakani.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. Babcock.
Yes.
Campbell. Absent. Escobedo. Absent. Morales. Absent. Smith.
Yes.
And Judge Rossi.
Yes.
That's 4 yeas, 0 nays, 3 absent, no abstentions. So the motion carries.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Kim.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you for your patience since we moved you to the bottom.
No worries.
All right, the last thing on our agenda, Chris, is for you to give us a ledge update, which sort of has happened already a little bit. But
yeah, I'm gonna hope
Dawn sort of tipped it off.
She did. Yes. We just couldn't help ourselves, so we had to start talking about it right away. So I'm gonna see if I can get you out here a little early. I kind of contemplated this piece might just take 10 minutes, and you might have a few questions. We can go a little longer if you want, but we might be able to, Judge Rossi, even end a bit early. So we kind of fell behind, and then we got caught up. So State Bar staff's update for you on legislative developments that we think will be very relevant to this committee's work. Commission as a whole, and this committee especially, will want to track are the following. So you may recall that on January 7th, I think, the commission met for an ad hoc meeting to delegate authority to State Bar staff to make emergency increases to 2025 Equal Access Fund grants that were essentially post. I'm just going to call it like post-election sort of part of the state's overall kind of response to changes that happened in the fall and that were contemplated to be happening this year. The state had proposed to appropriate more funds for Equal Access Fund grants for 2025 grantees, and had communicated to State Bar staff for the commission to know that the legislature was very keen that if it actually passed this law, that the dollars go out as quickly as possible, preferably within a couple of weeks. So the commission met in early January, delegated that authority to staff to be able to administer what would be formula increases. This wouldn't be competitive funding, but a formula-based increase for 2025 EAF grantees. The law that would authorize those increases has passed. The Assembly and the Senate. Oh, I see Lauren turned on her camera. Selena and Lauren, you're welcome to join me for this ledge update, like however you like. You can just jump in. So it did pass. The measure was sent to the governor's office, I think, on February 4th, and is awaiting the governor's signature. Maybe even Lauren and Selena have an exciting update with that respect. I don't know, but that's the last I heard. It was still pending his signature. Was just sent over though. The amount of funding that had been proposed in early January is the same. So I'm just going to tell you what it is again, but the parameters are slightly different. So it was $10 million, and that's what ended up being the amount that passed. So as a refresher, the state had proposed and passed $25 million for other agencies that will be involved in. I'm just going to read it out loud. For the purposes of defending the state. So this would not be the fund. This is the funds this commission would administer, but I just want you to know this exists for like the Department of Justice and Attorney General's office to defend the state against enforcement and legal actions taken by the federal government, filing affirmative litigation challenges, etc. So those are funds that were not actually included in the measure relevant to this commission's grantees, but also pass at the same time. Now, relevant to this commission's grantees, we're very excited to be able to say that the legislature did pass $10 million for the Legal Services Trust Fund Commission to increase 2025 Equal Access Fund grants to the 2025 grantees who opt in to receive that funding. They still have to affirm that they'll use those dollars to provide civil legal services to indigent persons who are at risk of detention, deportation, eviction, wage theft. None of this changed. This was all of what was originally proposed. Intimate partner violence and other actions that put their safety at risk. Since the commission met in early January, the legislature, with the state bars and LACs having had the opportunity to weigh in on this, added that those risks should be the result of potential or actual federal actions. That change ended up being very important to allowing the law to pass in special session instead of having to wait for general session, because the special session legislation had to be within the scope of the governor's November proclamation, which was limited to responses to changes to federal programs or other federal actions. So adding that is essentially what allowed this law to pass as early as it did. And also, the legislature ended up adding, and again, the state bar and LAC had the opportunity to weigh in on this, language that says, while it would go out by IOLTA funding formula on an opt-in basis, it would provide a minimum of $25,000 per grantee, because a lot of them would have gotten only a couple of, the very smallest grantees, if they opted in, would have otherwise gotten only a couple $1,000s. So this makes it a little bit more like meaningful that for them to opt in. And it will skip over one step in the formula, which is the pro bono allocation. And the public policy thinking behind that was the legislature, the state bar, LAC, thought it made sense for it to be more tied to each county's population that lives at or below 125% of federal poverty, rather than the QLSP's like delivery model, like that the pro bono piece was going to throw it. So that one step in the formula is skipped over, and that was something we supported. So there was one, and then there's one more development. I'm going to save it for just 30 seconds, but I'm going to just say also as part of that package was $10 million for CDSS, which is the California Department of Social Services, to provide immigration-related services, including removal defense. So that $10 million for CDSS to administer is narrower from a substantive law perspective than the $10 million this commission is administering, and $5 million for the California Access to Justice Commission as a one-time expansion of that commission's grants to nonprofit providers of legal services. One more update with respect to this measure that passed. So this is, the one that increases funding for the state's litigation is called SBX 1-1. It's kind of like Senate Bill Special Session 1-1. The one that increases funding for civil legal aid, the $10 million for this commission, the $10 million for CDSS, and the $5 million for the Access Commission is called SBX 1-2. For SBX 1-2, upon passing it, the authors did read for the record a restriction that kind of came to our awareness just before passage, that none of the funding in SBX 1-2 is, quote, intended to be used for immigration-related services for individuals with serious or violent felony convictions. It is the state bar's understanding that will be a requirement that we need to build into the grant agreement amendments for the programs, and it will also be built into the state bar's interagency agreement with the Judicial Council to administer these funds. So that is being communicated, that will be communicated promptly to grantees, and we'll be providing as much technical assistance as they like to help them navigate that, but it would only apply, of course, to the increase in funding if they opt into it, not to their original 2025 EAF grants. It doesn't actually apply to any of the other funds that the commission administers. It would just be specific to this increased amount. And that individuals with serious and violent felony convictions would be limited to immigration-related services. So if they want to propose to use their increased funding in a different area of law, that wouldn't apply. I don't know if Lauren or Selena wanted to add anything because they've been so involved with us on this.
I'm happy to give more of the, political play-by-play that went into that last little restriction, but I can refrain if that is not of interest or relevance to this committee.
I see Jacqueline's going to ask a question.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I'd like to hear more about that.
Sure. So essentially what happened was, despite there being an agreement between the leader of both houses of the assembly and the governor behind the scenes that this funding was going to go forward, at the 11th hour, a Republican assembly member offered a hostile amendment on the floor to the bill, which would have added a very broad restriction to the funding. So any individual receiving services that had any felony conviction, not just a violent or serious felony, could not receive immigration services, and organizations could not do anything that would help any individual with a record like this in any way, essentially. It would have been broad. It would have forced, organizations that don't even do immigration work to do criminal background checks on their clients. It was potentially very harmful. And unfortunately, the governor and the growing number of moderate Democrats in the assembly seemed potentially poised to just take the amendment. But a vote was called off behind the scenes. We did a lot of work to show how a broad restriction like this would be really harmful to organizations and make the money a lot less effective. And so the compromise that kind of came out of this was that the much narrower restriction was put into the journal. So it's kind of, it's not in the statute itself. You'd have to look in the journal notes, kind of like the dicta of the case. But we definitely see this as a win. The restriction is small. It doesn't apply to other funds that the organization uses. And for most organizations, this won't impact the work that they do with the money.
Exactly. And if they're an immigration legal aid provider, they could use this increase for other immigration clients, even in removal proceedings if they don't have the designated condition, and the other funding that they receive might be available to do some of that other work. So it's kind of if it means the law got to pass, I think that we're happy the law passed.
I have another quick question. This may not be the right Lauren, you might not be the right person to ask this, but as I understood, so if you're here undocumented, isn't that a felony in itself? And if you're undocumented, then and that's a felony, then how do you qualify for services? I'm just wondering. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not an immigration
to me.
I'm not an immigration law person, but it is my understanding that illegal re-entry into the United States is a felony. So some undocumented people, purely by the way they are undocumented, would have a felony record. So that would have prevented all of those people from qualifying for services. I believe there are other ways you can be in the country and be undocumented and not have a felony record, but it is possible if you got here through illegal re-entry that your immigration status alone would have made you a felon and not qualified for services, which is a point that we made to the legislators, that this is cutting a huge amount of people out of services. And we really focus too on how many mixed status families there are. And if you can't provide services to one person, oftentimes you're hurting the entire family. If they're the one whose name is on the lease, you can't help them with the eviction, for example.
That's also not being an immigration law attorney. That's my understanding as well, is not all Californians who are undocumented it's not a felony in and of itself to be present without status. Yeah, but you could have both. Yeah.
And the limitation on the funding that you will distribute has to have a violent or serious felony conviction, which is really different. So that's why we have been
conviction. Yeah.
Yes, conviction. So it's very narrow, and it doesn't prohibit the organization from serving those individuals with different sources of funding. They just can't use this state funding, which was really important.
I see.
Yeah, and it's hard to kind of know exactly what all the factors were, other than but like one thing that's possible is, if for some reason the legislature or others thought, we really want to pass these funds, and if this lets us do that safely, it's good that the funding exists. Of course, we want there to be as few restrictions as possible from a pure access to civil justice maximization standpoint, but it's good that this funding exists.
Thank you.
Ken?
Yeah, so I asked this question back at the January meeting, and I'm going to ask it again just to get staff's current thinking on it. Is the universe of recipients of this additional money all 2024 EAF grantees, or only those EAF grantees who had a definable set of activities in their application that fell within the subjects that were covered in the special session? Immigration, eviction defense, et cetera, because not all EAF grantees necessarily propose those definable set of activities in their application.
Right. Good question. So the opt-in process was open to all 2025 EAF grantees. So it'd be like this year's grants that just began.
Okay.
And of the 115 2025 EAF grantees, I can't remember the exact number, but I think like 110 have opted in or something. So almost everyone has opted in. And the reason, and I think this might be the answer you're hoping to hear, is it's not limited to those enumerated clauses in the bill that has passed. So it's not, they didn't have to propose, they will not have to propose spending it purely on eviction defense, preventing wage theft, dot. There's the last one is sort of a catch-all clause. It says or other actions that put their safety at risk. So as long as they can make a good faith, reasonable argument, and it can be increased funding for their originally approved EAF project or a separate new thing, as long as they can make a good faith, reasonable argument that it complies with that catch-all clause at the end, that it will protect Californians whose safety may be at risk as a result of actual or potential federal action, it will be approved, as long as it meets the commission's other sort of standards for budget proposals. And almost everyone knowing that has opted in. So yeah. So I do have one more set of legislative developments I wanted to flag for you. So that's kind of the nuanced, very positive update. That funding, staff had set up an infrastructure to administer that as quickly as possible upon the governor signing the bill into law, which he has said he plans to do, and we're just waiting for that to happen. But the opt-in process will conclude. It's like a rolling deadline. That opt-in process will officially come to a conclusion shortly after he signs it into law. We'll release budget proposal forms. We'll review those, and then we'll release grant agreement amendments and get the funding out as quickly as we can. And we're working closely with the Judicial Council to be able to do that. And they've been wonderfully supportive and helpful in that process. The other thing that we actually didn't get to, it didn't even exist when the commission met back in January. So congratulations, you're the first commissioners who'll be hearing about this. There's been a flurry of exciting public policy ideas in January, both in response to sort of the fall, but especially in response to natural disasters, because I think the natural disasters struck in Southern California shortly after or around the time or shortly after the commission met in the beginning of that month. So a lot has happened since then. But the natural disasters, which are always inherently severe, have obviously been especially severe and high profile in the month of January. And the opportunity for LAC, the Judicial Council, the State Bar of California, and this commission to meaningfully advocate for public policy changes to support Californians and this commission's grantees after a disaster is quite high. That opportunity is quite high. So the State Bar has worked closely with LAC to propose, and I do want to just say that this is something that going forward, staff I think would really like to work closely with the commission and in particular this committee on these sorts of proposals, but has proposed for the legislatures and others' consideration a slate of possible changes that would make it easier for this commission's grantees to serve Californians after disaster. So I'm just going to give you three that I think are really promising and interesting. The first one, and this, I think where this is at right now is it's simply the it's LAC that's bringing this forward and has consulted with the State Bar on it. So Selena and Lauren, feel free to jump in here as well. But the first one would be the proposal that the Business and Professions Code definition for indigent person, which is in the IOLTA statute, be relaxed after a major official natural disaster in the following way. So currently, IOLTA grantees have to use their IOLTA funding to serve, quote, indigent persons, and that's more or less defined as those who live at or below 200% of the federal poverty threshold. That's how most of them qualify. Or they can be seniors, as defined as 60 or older. They qualify for services under the Older Americans Act, OAA funded services, or they qualify for certain federal programs for people with disabilities. Most clients of IOLTA grantees get in under the 200% of federal poverty. So the first proposal is to define indigent person as also including those who live between 200% and 300% when they are trying to recover from an officially declared at the state or federal level natural disaster. And there's actually like specific phrasing that would probably need to include to make sure that all the appropriate types of possibly declared disasters are included, because there's a difference between like a major disaster and like that sort of thing. But essentially the gist of it is that it would be if an official disaster declaration is made by the federal government of the state of California, IOLTA grantees could use those funds to actually serve folks between 200 and 300% of federal poverty as well, those households, to recover from that disaster. So that was one idea that LAC is advancing. Another one is the one that Jenny Anders Gable or Skip raised earlier about out-of-county expenditures. So I'll just kind of say that one again, which is currently in the IOLTA statute. The funding formula provides each grantee with a sum that they, on the basis of the county they applied to serve next year, on the basis of that county's poverty population, the population that lives at or below 125% of federal poverty, a sum of money to serve that county in the next year. And they're not supposed to use those funds to serve a different county because it's tied to that county's population. The proposal is after a disaster to be able to use the allocation for a particular county to serve a different county in the event of a natural disaster. That's the next, it's normally would be called out of county expenditure. So here, not only would it be allowed, but they'd be able to count it towards your future primary purpose eligibility and award size. And it would be like a special moment where everyone comes together to help each other out. And as an illustration of that, Legal Services of Northern California, where Jenny Anders Gable works, Jenny has been flying down, I believe, to LA to help Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County, where Skip works, to respond to the SoCal fires. And the EDs of the IOLTA grantees want to be able to send their staff across the state to help each other in that moment. But currently, they're not allowed to use IOLTA funding to do that because if it's out of county. Okay. The third idea that's been advanced is would be a change to the Business and Professions Code. It's a section called 6033. And as a reminder, this may ring a bell. The legislature created another source of funding for civil legal aid in California through what we call the opt-out line on California lawyers' annual licensing statement from the State Bar sends out when they go to pay their annual licensing fees. There's a line that provides that they'll essentially donate $45 to civil legal aid and they can opt out of it. Currently, and that generates about $6 to $8 million for civil legal aid every year, I think, is if I recall correctly. Currently, the law requires that basically go to support the IOLTA grants. It just gets rolled in with that. It's pooled with those funds and it goes up IOLTA formula. The proposal is because IOLTA grants have been so high in the last few years due to high interest rates at times, it feels less necessary that $6 to $8 million kind of donation from attorneys be pulled with the IOLTA funds, when instead it could legally maybe be freed up for something like emergency funding help QLSPs respond to natural disasters, or something Skip had proposed, prepare. It's like pre-emergency funding to prepare for natural disaster, or something similar. It would be something that it would still be this commission that would oversee the administration of those funds. But essentially, instead of requiring that it just always go out with the IOLTA grants every year, maybe that's a sort, it wouldn't be, they're not general fund dollars. It's not something the state would have to like every year re-up in an appropriations, but it would just be there for this commission to administer as a nimble emergency funding, much like Skip was so badly wishing existed. So that's the third. Lauren, Selena, did I get all, would you add to or correct anything I just said? Because I think LAC is the one that's advancing those three right now, right? Those are, we consulted with you and LAC is pushing this. Okay, I didn't want to speak for you, but great. Any questions about those three ideas?
They're all great ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something you said at the very beginning, because that was a lot of great info. Did you say that seniors and people with disabilities typically don't have to meet that poverty financial restriction? when applying
Seniors, Californians who are 60 or older, and some Californians who have disabilities and qualify for certain federal programs do not have to live at or below 200% of federal
Oh,
poverty. Yeah.
I missed the last sentence.
Yeah, Californians who are 60 or older, and Californians who have certain disabilities and qualify for certain federally funded services don't have to live at or below 200% of the federal poverty. They're automatically considered indigent persons.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
That's very important. Thank you for
Yeah.
clarifying that.
Selena.
I was just going to track that back to the statute because it's a connection to federal funding for federal legal services. And so that's why we have, either based on income, which is how Legal Services Corporation federal funding is, or based on age, which is Older Americans Act federal funding for legal services, or it's based on specific developmental disabilities, which is another federal funding stream. So our IOLTA statute mirrors those three kind of federal buckets of eligibility. Although each organization sets their own priorities. And so organizations that serve seniors typically have, as part of their intake process, they're really hoping to serve the lowest income seniors in their area.
Great, thank you.
And it would be this committee, to the extent the commission wants to, in the strategic plan and the fall infrastructure work, the spirit of the fall infrastructure working group recommendations, like the commission wants to really support grantees more from a public policy perspective. And it would be this committee that would sort of do that work, that analysis, the direct staff to research things and think through things. And this is all these things just kind of came up in January and it was very sudden because of the fires. But this is the sort of stuff that we hope this committee can get like really excited about and help us think through.
I'm really excited. No, I think this is great. If anything, I would love to see it go even further, but Selena and Lauren are like the experts on what's realistic in Sacramento, so I always defer to them on that. But yeah, all three of those proposals make a ton of sense to me. The freeing up that opt-out $6 to $8 million is exactly one of the things I had in my mind coming into this meeting is like, can we create like an emergency fund or a rapid response fund or something to be able to do whatever is needed, within 2 weeks, like you said, Chris, and it sounds like that's the goal there. So that's wonderful. Maybe just a couple of the maybe these are pie in the sky ideas. I don't know. Maybe they're doable. That I had was it's just like questions around what like disaster victims right now might need. What do the statutes allow, if anything, around basically agencies just giving straight cash grants to people who need money to pay out an insurance deductible or whatever it is? I mean, I think that they don't allow direct cash aid. But with this 6 to 8 million, would there be any room if grantees said that would be helpful for low-income Californians to go even further and and allow that type of assistance?
That would require a change to the business and professions code to I think
Changing anyway.
free it up for that, because yeah, and because currently it goes into the ILTA formula, and the ILTA formula says it must be for civil legal services. In fact, that's always the phrase that's like almost always copy and pasted in any of the authorizing statutes for this commission's grants. It's always legal services. And so that's the current requirement on 6033 funds. But so that would be a statutory change.
Which we're proposing to amend anyway, right? 6033.
Yeah, and yeah, to at least free it up for like emergency grants. I think the current proposal that LAC is helping advance would still keep it as civil legal services, but it would be like for emergency, like on an emergency basis, get it out the door really quickly or prepare for an emergency. Yeah, I don't think it's been contemplated that it would be like cash assistance.
Yeah, and so maybe, just based on, Selena and Lauren, where you are in the legislative cycle and what's realistic, that's too big of a change to think about. But I mean, honestly, there's a lot of talk about cash aid, direct cash aid, and if that's something that we could put on the pie in the sky long-term wish list for flexible funds, I would love to see that. And my other comment on the out of county issue makes so much sense. And again, like thinking even bigger, and maybe this is just what you can get now and that's fine, get it. But I think the whole structure kind of needs to go in this direction. When there are like no family law lawyers in like 20 counties, like can we allow the 12 organizations in LA that do family law to serve someone remotely who's in the northern part of the state where there's nothing? I mean, I just think that county restriction is quite limiting. And I would just, love to see us think hard about that. And if it still makes sense to have that, I strongly agree. After a disaster, it does not make sense to have that, and support this proposal. And like, if it could even go farther. And I mean, like one example, I read your very thoughtful and well done report on the community justice workers that LAC put out with One Justice recently, and just wanted to mention that today too, just to see if that was something that this committee might look at putting on its priorities for this year or next year or something. Just like what can the state bar, this committee do to support this move towards maybe adopting a community justice worker initiative? And that was something where it occurred to me, we're going to launch something new like this. Does it make sense to constrain ourselves in the same county by county model that we have, where like the community justice workers would need to be in the same county, like sponsored by the same LSOs? Like we're just recreating the same deserts. Or could we think a little more broadly about using technology and remote tools to serve people, more comprehensively throughout the state? So those were really big picture ideas. I love these 3 ideas, and as much as you can get, like go for it.
Yeah, I saw Dwan hopped in. Yeah, Dwan.
Yeah, I just want to respond to the community justice worker proposal. We actually had it on deck to have a presentation at the commission meeting about it, but there wasn't as much traction in the legislature, as much appetite this year to have it done. So it's still there, and if that picks up, we will have a more full on presentation so that the commission knows what's happening around regulatory reform and this community justice worker kind of idea that's like circulating in other states but hasn't quite been brought to California yet. There is a proposal that's on deck right now that's being advanced by the legal aid community, and the commission does have a role in this proposal and how this particular project will be stood up. We just thought, because it's not moving yet and there's so many other things, like we're just going to defer it a little bit until we get a little bit more of a green light from the legislature that this would be okay to kind of take on for the Trust Fund Commission and the State Bar as well.
Thank you, Dawn. And I just want to say that did conclude staff's legislative update. So I kind of did turn it back to the chair. If there are any other questions, or you wanted to wrap up a few minutes early? I guess I thought that would take 10 minutes, but of course I talked for like 15 minutes. So silly.
We'll know next time. It's our first meeting. We didn't know. we didn't know how long it would take. But Erin has her hand up. So
Yeah,
she's
and
not
I
gonna
just
let us-
have one other question. So my recollection is in January when we met, we thought there was going to be another pot of funding
That's right. Yes.
for, new, and that this committee was going to be responsible for creating some brand new RFP on a very expedited timeframe. So what's the status of that?
Yeah. Thank you. I forgot to talk about that. That was actually one of my talking points. I accidentally skipped it. So the other item that the commission actually voted on January 7th was, should the legislature appropriate funding for post-elections, I think is what we called it at the time, competitive grants. So not the formula-based increases to their 2025 EAF grants, but like this would need an RFP, and this committee or the commission would need to have designed an RFP, and if there would be scoring, et cetera. The commission had delegated authority to this committee to design the RFP so that those grants could also get administered quickly. That has not, there has not been legislation to create that. So as of today, that's not a thing that I have on this committee's agenda for the next 2 meetings, but should that come up, that the commission has delegated that authority. So you kind of have that standing authority for what could be post-election competitive grants.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Erin. I've forgotten to. Okay, well, how close are we to 3? We got our first meeting in with 5 minutes to spare. I think that's everything on our agenda, right, Chris?
That's right. We got through
Great.
it.
Well, thank you all for being here in the inaugural PDI committee meeting. Lots of great things to talk about at our next meeting in March. And then, of course, if there's anything that needs being updated after the executive committee meeting, I will reach out, or Chris will reach out to the committee and let you know. And Erin, I will definitely bring your membership questions up at the meeting next week. But seeing nothing else on our agenda, I will give you all a few minutes back and we can go ahead and adjourn this inaugural meeting of the PDI committee. Thank you, Lauren and Selena, for being here as always. And commissioners, thank you for being here. State Bar staff, you're the best.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for chairing, Judge
staff.
Rossi. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful, happy Friday. Have a great weekend.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Everybody.
Okay.
Thanks.
Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Thanks.